Long before the moving staircases, before the feasts in the Great Hall, before the Sorting Hat said to subscribe, Britain's magical world was a dangerous and scattered place. Witches and wizards lived in small groups or alone, hiding their talents from fearful muggles. These were centuries of suspicion and fire, when being discovered as magical could mean exile, punishment, or worse. Children born with power often grew up without guidance, their gifts running wild, sometimes harming themselves or others. Knowledge was passed down in fragments, a charm remembered by a grandmother, a brewing method kept by a family in the north, a bit of transfiguration lore whispered by a traveling hedge wizard. There was no central place where young witches and wizards could gather, no safe hall of learning to bring order to the chaos of magic. It was during the early Middle Ages, around the 10th century, that four of the greatest magical minds of their age recognized the problem. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin were each powerful in their own right, but more importantly, they were visionaries. They saw a future where children would not need to grow up fearing themselves or the world. They dreamed of a school, a castle hidden deep in the wilds of Scotland, where young witches and wizards could be trained in safety, nurtured in their talents, and prepared for the challenges of the magical life. The choice of location was deliberate. They sought a place distant from the prying eyes of muggles, one cloaked in natural defenses of mountains, lochs, and thick forests. Magic woven into the land itself whispered of secrecy and endurance. By legend, Rowena Ravenclaw was the one who first dreamt of the towering castle, her sharp mind drawing out the design that would defy both time and attack. She envisioned high walls that could not be breached, towers that would scrape the clouds, and wards that would remain strong even 1,000 years later. Godric Gryffindor, bold and practical, championed the idea of building a fortress that could also serve as a home. Salazar Slytherin pressed for powerful enchantments to ensure secrecy, for he mistrusted the tolerance of muggles and foresaw the need for protection. Helga Hufflepuff, ever loyal and kind, reminded them that their greatest work was not stone or spell, but the community of children who would fill the halls. Each founder brought their strength. Gryffindor's courage and skill in battle secured the grounds during construction, for dangerous creatures roamed freely in those days. He wielded his legendary sword, later enchanted to present itself to any worthy Gryffindor, to defend their workers against threats from the Highlands. Ravenclaw supplied her keen intellect, devising enchantments to stabilize towers, designing staircases that could move and shift to confound intruders, and crafting magical windows that looked out across Scotland, but also shielded the view from unwanted eyes. Hufflepuff worked with house elves, those loyal magical beings who sought refuge from harsh masters, offering them safety and purpose within the school. She saw that the castle would need caretakers, cooks, and guardians of tradition. And so Hogwarts was bound to elves who served not in chains, but in willing devotion. And Slytherin, brilliant though stern, conjured protections darker and stronger than the others wished to attempt. He created the most secret passages, the deepest wards, and though he kept it hidden, the chamber beneath the school that would remain undiscovered for nearly 1,000 years, as the castle rose stone by enchanted stone. The founders debated what their school should represent. Godric Gryffindor believed above all in courage, daring, and honor. He wished to train students who would never shrink from standing against evil. Rowena Ravenclaw valued the mind, wanting a place where wit, learning, and discovery would flourish above all else. Helga Hufflepuff, humble but steady, insisted that all children deserved a chance to learn, regardless of heritage or natural talent. She argued that loyalty, fairness, and hard work mattered as much as brilliance or bravery. And Salazar Slytherin, whose ambition matched his cunning, believed that the school should focus on those from old wizarding families, certain that magical purity would protect the strength of their kind. For a time, They compromised, each shaping their own house, each imprinting their values upon future generations. The founding of Hogwarts was more than the creation of a school. It was the birth of an institution that would dominate wizarding culture for a millennium. Young witches and wizards, some as young as 11, would leave their scattered villages to climb the rugged path toward the looming towers. They would sit beneath the new sorting hat, enchanted with the thoughts of the 4 founders, and be placed into the house that matched their spirit. They would eat in a hall where the ceiling mirrored the sky, where the warmth of community would chase away the cold of the Scottish Highlands. They would wander corridors lined with portraits that spoke and staircases that shifted, learning charms, transfiguration, potions, and defense. For the first time, the magical youth of Britain would grow together, not in isolation, but in fellowship. But even in its earliest days, Hogwarts carried seeds of conflict. Slytherin's insistence on pure-blood students clashed with Gryffindor's defense of all magical children, regardless of their parentage. Ravenclaw, too, grew impatient with Slytherin's narrowness, and Hufflepuff sought to calm tempers while defending inclusivity. Their arguments echoed through the stone halls, and though they worked together, trust began to fray. Students felt the tension as well. Houses gave them pride and belonging, but also division. Rivalries sparked. Competition turned sharp. Still, the magic of the school held, and year after year, new generations came. Legends say that during the very first opening feast, when the Sorting Hat sang for the first time, the hall fell silent as its voice declared the values of the founders. Candles floated above long tables, food appeared in endless supply, and children who had grown up hiding their magic now laughed together in wonder. Ghosts of witches and wizards past began to gather as well, tied to the castle's power. Some chose to remain as guides and companions, the Fat Friar for Hufflepuff, Nearly Headless Nick for Gryffindor, the Grey Lady for Ravenclaw, and the Bloody Baron for Slytherin. From the very beginning, Hogwarts was alive not only with the living, but with spirits who bound themselves to its story. By the end of its founding generation, Hogwarts stood as a place unlike any in the world. Its walls were thick with spells, its grounds alive with enchantment, its very stones humming with the power of 4 legendary witches and wizards. No Muggle eye could see it, for the founders cloaked it with illusions that made it appear as a ruin to outsiders. To magical children, however, it became the heart of their future, a promise that they would not walk alone. The founders had succeeded in their dream, a sanctuary, a fortress, a home, a place where magic could be taught, shaped, and passed on without fear. And yet, within those walls, the differences of philosophy would not remain silent forever. Hogwarts was safe, yes, but not free from the ambitions of those who built it. The stage was set for stories of loyalty, of division, of triumph and betrayal. The castle would endure through centuries, but the unity of its creators would not. What they built together would one day be shadowed by what drove them apart. From the very first years of Hogwarts, one founder's presence seemed to define the spirit of the place more than any other. Godric Gryffindor, remembered as a warrior, a champion of courage, and a defender of the innocent, became both a symbol and a legend within the walls he helped build. His name is now stamped into banners, into songs, and into the very house that carries his lion crest. But to understand the weight of Gryffindor's legacy, we must return to the man himself. Godric was born in the west of England, in a land of wide fields, deep rivers, and long traditions of village life. Though much about his early childhood has been lost to history, legends tell that he displayed signs of magic from the moment he could walk. A sword appeared in his hand one day when he was only a boy, shimmering with magic, as if the blade itself recognized his courage before he even understood it. Unlike some witches and wizards of his time, Godric did not keep his gifts hidden. He grew up in a period of constant threat, when local warlords fought for territory and when muggles often hunted magical folk out of fear. Godric chose not to retreat, but to step forward, using his talents to defend the helpless. Stories passed down through the centuries describe him as a tall, broad-shouldered man with hair like flame and a laugh that could shake a room. He was fierce in battle but never cruel, brave without being reckless, and always ready to take up arms when injustice struck. His sword, later enchanted to resist time and to appear to any worthy Gryffindor, became his trusted companion. He fought not for wealth or power, but for what he believed was right: protection of the weak, justice against oppression, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. It was this spirit that made him both loved and feared, for in those days there were few who could stand against him. When the idea of Hogwarts was first discussed, Godric was the one who argued that the school must belong to every child with magic, no matter who their parents were. While Salazar Slytherin muttered about bloodlines and heritage, Godric stood firmly on the belief that bravery and talent could be found in anyone. He knew that magical children born to non-magical families often suffered most, abandoned or punished for powers they did not understand. To him, Hogwarts was a promise that no child would have to grow up alone, hunted or ashamed of what they were. His compassion stretched beyond family names, beyond class or fortune, to the simple truth that courage and honor mattered most. Inside the school, Gryffindor shaped much of the daily life that still defines Hogwarts today. The very idea of a dueling practice ground, where students could learn not only spells but also the courage to face an opponent, is credited to him. He believed that theory was useless without action. Charms, transfiguration, potions, all were important, but to Godric, what mattered was how one used them in the heat of a challenge. He taught that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. Students who studied under him remembered not only his skill with magic, but also his insistence that loyalty and friendship were just as powerful as any spell. Gryffindor also valued fairness in leadership. Where other founders sometimes held tightly to their secrets, Godric shared knowledge openly. He was the first to suggest the creation of a communal hall, where all students could gather, not divided by rank or status. This hall became the Great Hall, a place where meals were shared and victories celebrated, where students of every house could look up at the enchanted ceiling and feel that they belonged to something larger than themselves. In this way, Godric helped make Hogwarts not only a school of magic, but also a community. Yet his most enduring legacy lies in the Sorting Hat. It was Godric Gryffindor who proposed enchanting his own hat to serve as a guide for the future. As the four founders debated how to choose students for their houses, concern grew that after their deaths, no one would know how to carry on the tradition. Gryffindor, with characteristic boldness, placed his hat on the table and suggested they give it the wisdom of their own minds. Enchanted with the thoughts of all four founders, the Sorting Hat became the keeper of their ideals. To this day, when it sings its songs and whispers into the minds of new students, it carries Godric's voice alongside Rowena's, Helga's, and Salazar's. But many believe that its most famous declarations of courage, of daring, of chivalry echo most strongly from Gryffindor's own heart. Though he is remembered for his bravery, Gryffindor was not without flaws. His temper was quick, and when faced with Salazar Slytherin's growing obsession with blood purity, the two clashed fiercely. Accounts describe fiery arguments echoing through the castle halls, with Godric demanding openness and Slytherin demanding restriction. Their friendship, strong in the beginning, became strained. Godric refused to turn away Muggle-born students, insisting that talent should never be wasted, while Salazar saw danger in trusting outsiders. The tension grew until eventually Slytherin chose to leave the school he had helped build. The legend of their final confrontation remains one of the turning points in Hogwarts history. Some say their duel shook the very stones of the castle. Others believe their parting was colder, a battle of words rather than one. What is certain is that Gryffindor stood his ground, and the doors of Hogwarts remained open to all magical children. As the years passed, Godric continued to shape his students and his house. He told them stories of valor, encouraged them to take risks for noble causes, and reminded them that bravery was found in the small choices as well as the great. To defend a friend, to tell the truth, to admit a mistake. These, he said, were acts of courage, as meaningful as facing a dragon. His students carried these lessons into the world, and many became known as defenders of magical communities during turbulent centuries. In this way, Gryffindor's influence stretched far beyond the walls of the castle. Even after his death, his legacy endured in both tangible and intangible ways. The Sword of Gryffindor, goblin-made and imbued with properties that allowed it to absorb the strength of that which it touched, was left behind as a relic of his spirit. It would later appear to those in need, reinforcing the idea that bravery calls upon strength greater than itself. The house that bore his name carried his lion emblem, a symbol of courage and leadership, and students continued to live under his banner. The tales of his laughter, his boldness, and his unwavering loyalty grew into legend, told at feasts and whispered in dormitories. Generations later, even children who never met him would feel they knew him, as if his spirit lingered in the very stones of the Gryffindor common room. In the end, Godric Gryffindor's greatest gift to Hogwarts was not his sword, his hat, or even his house. It was his belief that the school was meant for everyone. He fought to make it a sanctuary for all magical children, regardless of birth. He ensured that courage was celebrated, not only on the battlefield, but in everyday acts of kindness and truth. He set the tone for 1,000 years of Hogwarts life, where bravery would be admired, where the lion's roar would echo through the halls, and where students would be taught that even in the darkest times, courage lights the way. And so, as Hogwarts grew into its first century, Gryffindor's influence remained strong. His ideals became the foundation of its spirit. Yet the school was not his alone. For every value he fought to defend, there was another founder shaping Hogwarts in their own way. Among them was one whose vision would soon clash with his own, a man whose cunning and ambition would leave an equally powerful mark upon the school. To understand the balance and the conflict that defined Hogwarts from its earliest days, we must turn to Salazar Slytherin. Salazar Slytherin was a man of great power and sharp vision, remembered as both a brilliant founder and a figure of division. Where Godric Gryffindor was loud and open in his beliefs, Salazar was quiet, calculating, and deliberate. His presence at Hogwarts gave the school its deep sense of secrecy, its hidden corners, and its darker protections. He believed that magic was something precious, something that needed guarding, and not everyone agreed with how far he wished to take that protection. He was born in the fenlands of eastern England, where rivers and marshes stretched wide and mist covered the ground. From boyhood he showed an unusual command of magic, not only in charms and hexes, but in the language of serpents itself. He was a parselmouth, able to speak to snakes, a gift rare even among powerful witches and wizards. This gift set him apart and gave him both respect and fear. Some saw him as chosen, others as cursed. Salazar himself treated it as a sign of destiny, proof that his bloodline was touched by something ancient and powerful. When the idea of Hogwarts was raised, Salazar joined eagerly, for he saw the value of a hidden fortress where magical children could learn far from Muggle suspicion. Yet from the very beginning he disagreed with the others about who should be welcomed. To him, only those of pure magical ancestry could be trusted. He feared that Muggle-born witches and wizards might carry danger into their world, bringing betrayal or weakness. He argued that the school must be strong, that its students must come from proven families. To Gryffindor, this was an insult. To Hufflepuff, it was unfair. To Ravenclaw, it was a waste of potential. Still, Salazar pressed his point, believing that if they allowed outsiders, one day the school would be at risk. Despite these conflicts, his genius was undeniable. The most powerful protective enchantments woven into the castle came from his hand. He was a master of wards and curses, creating barriers that confused intruders and layers of magic that made Hogwarts nearly impossible to breach. He crafted secret passageways, some known to the other founders and some known only to himself. Among his greatest works was the hidden chamber beneath the school, a place he alone could open with Parseltongue. Within it, he placed a creature of terror, a basilisk bred to obey his command. In his mind, this was not madness, but foresight. If ever the school fell into hands he did not trust, if ever Muggle-born students outnumbered the rest, the chamber would be a final safeguard, a weapon sleeping beneath the stone. Students who studied under him found him a stern teacher, but a gifted one. He taught them not only spells but strategy. He told them that ambition was not shameful, that cunning could achieve what strength alone could not, to plan carefully, to seize opportunities, to understand the hidden motives of others. These were lessons he valued as much as wand work. Where Gryffindor celebrated boldness, Slytherin admired restraint. Where Hufflepuff loved fairness, Slytherin taught survival. Where Ravenclaw prized wit, Slytherin emphasized control. His students carried these lessons into the world, many becoming powerful leaders, healers, and yes, dark wizards too. For his teachings could be used for either noble or cruel ends. The growing conflict with Gryffindor defined his later years. Their arguments grew sharper, their friendship cracked. Salazar saw the admission of Muggle-borns as a betrayal of wizardkind. Gryffindor saw Salazar's prejudice as a betrayal of Hogwarts' true purpose. The tension reached a point where the other founders could no longer stand between them. Legends say they fought, some with words, some with wands, the castle itself trembling from their power. In the end, Salazar left, whether he departed in anger or sorrow. History does not agree. What is certain is that he abandoned the school but not his influence. His chamber remained, his house carried on. His ideals did not vanish but lingered in whispers, in traditions, in the Sorting Hat's choices. Even after his departure, Salazar's presence was felt. Students of Slytherin House bore his name and his serpent crest. They were taught to value ambition, resourcefulness, and self-preservation. Some became heroes, others became feared, but all carried the mark of their founder's philosophy. The basilisk slept beneath the floors, unseen, but its existence was a reminder that Salazar Slytherin had built for more than just his own time. He built for an imagined future when his warnings might prove true. To many, he is remembered as the founder who broke unity, the man who let prejudice divide what was meant to be whole. Yet others see him as a visionary, one who foresaw dangers that others refused to acknowledge. History does not tell us his full mind, but the legacy of his decisions shaped Hogwarts forever. His house produced both champions and villains. His chamber remained a hidden secret for centuries. His belief that ambition was strength lived on long after his footsteps faded from the castle halls. Thus Hogwarts stood with one of its creators gone, 3 founders left to carry on, but always with the shadow of Slytherin behind them. His story set the stage for conflicts that would echo throughout generations. His choice to leave showed how fragile unity could be, even among the greatest witches and wizards. And yet Hogwarts endured, held together by the will of those who remained. Among them was one whose kindness balanced both Gryffindor's boldness and Slytherin's severity. A witch who saw not blood or power, but the simple worth of every student. To her, the school was not a fortress or a battlefield, but a home. Her name was Helga Hufflepuff. If Salazar Slytherin was remembered for ambition and secrecy, Helga Hufflepuff became the heart of Hogwarts. She was not the loudest or the most forceful of the founders, but without her steady presence, the school would never have become the home it was meant to be. Where others argued over bloodlines or ideals, Helga thought first of the children. To her, every witch and wizard deserved a chance to learn, no matter who their parents were, no matter how great or small their talent might appear. She believed that kindness and loyalty were strengths, not weaknesses, and that a community built on fairness could last longer than one built on fear or pride. Helga was born in the wide valleys of Wales, where hills rolled green and villages clung to stone. From an early age, she displayed a gift for magic connected to food and hearth, spells that nurtured, protected, and brought comfort. She could charm fire to burn warm without smoke, enchant a pot to cook without ever boiling over, and create bread from flour that never spoiled. These talents may seem humble beside jewels and curses, but in times of scarcity they were nothing short of miraculous. Families survived winters because of her craft. Neighbors came together around meals she conjured. Magic, she showed, was not only for battle but for everyday life. When she joined the other founders to build Hogwarts, her role was clear. Godric might defend the walls, Rowena might design the towers, Salazar might weave the deepest enchantments, but Helga created the home within those walls. She worked with house elves, not as masters had done for centuries, but as partners. She offered them shelter in exchange for their service, creating a bond of trust that lasts even now. The Hogwarts kitchens, hidden beneath the Great Hall, were her design, filled with warmth and enchantment, with rows of cauldrons and enchanted knives, with cupboards that restocked themselves and ovens that never cooled. It was Helga who ensured that every feast, no matter how grand, was also a reminder of care and plenty, a symbol that the school would always provide for its children. Her values shaped the house that bore her name. Hufflepuff House welcomed all who were overlooked elsewhere. Where Gryffindor sought the bold, Ravenclaw the clever, Slytherin the ambitious, Helga opened her arms to the loyal, the hard-working, and the kind. She told her students that glory did not belong only to those who won duels or spoke the loudest. True strength could be found in those who worked quietly, who supported others, who remained steady when times grew dark. In her view, fairness mattered as much as talent. A student who studied diligently deserved as much respect as one who dazzled with natural brilliance. Because of this, Helga's house became known as the most inclusive, the place where no child felt left behind. Students from every background found safety there. Some who lacked confidence elsewhere thrived under her guidance. It was said that she knew the name of every pupil in the castle, that she greeted them not as strangers but as members of a family. In her care, Hogwarts became more than a fortress of magic. It became a sanctuary of belonging. Her lessons were not limited to spells. She taught the importance of loyalty, of standing by friends, of fairness even when it was difficult. She reminded her pupils that courage was admirable and wit impressive, but what mattered most was the strength to remain true, to work together, to value every person. Her students learned that cooperation could win battles that ambition and pride could lose. Many of them went on to become healers, teachers, and protectors, shaping wizarding society in quiet ways that endured longer than any war. One of Helga's most enduring legacies was her contribution to magical food. Many of the recipes still served at Hogwarts feasts are based on her original enchantments. Pumpkin juice, treacle tart, roast meats, and puddings that appear as if by miracle, all trace back to her charms. She believed that shared meals had power, that eating together created bonds stronger than rivalry. In the Great Hall, where candles floated and the ceiling showed the sky, her vision lived in every plate that filled itself and every cup that never emptied. While the conflicts between Gryffindor and Slytherin grew, Helga often acted as the mediator. She listened with patience, urged compromise, and tried to keep the school united. She sided firmly with Gryffindor and Ravenclaw on the matter of admitting Muggle-borns, believing that talent and heart mattered more than ancestry. Yet she rarely raised her voice in anger. Instead, she spoke softly, with reason and with kindness, often calming the storm of tempers that threatened to divide the founders. Her steady presence prevented the school from breaking apart sooner than it did. But though she worked to keep peace, she was not without her own strength. When danger threatened the castle during its early years, she fought beside her fellow founders. Though not as famed a duelist as Gryffindor or as feared as Slytherin, she wielded charms of protection and transfiguration that saved countless students. Her courage was not in reckless charges, but in the determination to defend others. To stand unyielding even when outmatched was her quiet bravery. After her passing, her influence continued through Hufflepuff House, the common room, near the kitchens and filled with round doors and earthy warmth, reflected her spirit. Students there lived close to the heart of the school, near the meals she had designed and the house elves she had befriended. The emblem of the badger, chosen by Helga, symbolized loyalty and perseverance, an animal small but fierce, gentle but unyielding when threatened. Her golden cup, later lost to time and tragedy, became one of the most famous relics of Hogwarts. It was a simple thing compared to the jeweled sword of Gryffindor or the shining diadem of Ravenclaw, yet it carried her essence, a reminder of hospitality and abundance. It was this cup that would be twisted centuries later into one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, but in her time it was a vessel of pride, representing the heart she poured into her house. More than any other founder, Helga Hufflepuff embodied the idea that Hogwarts was not only for the gifted, but for all who sought knowledge. She saw potential where others saw weakness. She offered chances where others closed doors, and she believed that fairness was the foundation of greatness. Without her, the castle might have become a fortress only for the proud, but because of her, it became a home for every child with magic. And so the school carried on, its halls echoing with laughter, its feasts shining with her spells, its students learning not only power, but compassion. Yet even with her influence, the balance among the founders was fragile. For in the end, it was not kindness or courage alone that shaped Hogwarts, but the mingling of all four visions. And one of those visions, sharp and brilliant, belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw, whose mind gave the castle its very shape, and whose story held both triumph and tragedy. Among the four founders, Rowena Ravenclaw is remembered as the brightest mind, the one whose wisdom and imagination shaped Hogwarts into more than just a fortress. She gave the castle its vision, its soaring towers, its winding staircases, and its sense of wonder. Where Gryffindor brought courage, Slytherin brought cunning, and Hufflepuff brought loyalty, Rowena offered intellect, invention, and the belief that knowledge could illuminate even the darkest places. Her legacy was not only in her house, but in the very stones of Hogwarts, which still carry her design and her dreams. Rowena was born in the glens of Scotland, where ancient mountains met the sea and storms swept across the land. Even as a child, she showed signs of a mind sharper than most. Legends say that she could solve riddles before she could walk, that she created small enchantments from instinct rather than training, and that she always asked why the stars moved across the sky, why spells worked the way they did, why knowledge should be hidden instead of shared. Her hunger for understanding was endless, and this hunger became the foundation of her life. When the founders came together, it was Rowena who drew the plans for their castle. She envisioned towers that would touch the heavens, walls that would hold centuries of knowledge, and corridors that would seem alive with shifting secrets. It is said that the moving staircases were her creation, an enchantment to keep students alert and to remind them that learning never followed a straight path. The enchanted ceilings, the hidden chambers, the secret libraries, all reflected her love of mystery and her belief that discovery itself was the greatest teacher. Her house bore her name, Ravenclaw, and its values matched her spirit. She sought students who loved learning, who prized intelligence and creativity, who would rather solve a puzzle than win a duel. To her, magic was not only power, but curiosity. She taught her students that knowledge was endless, that questions mattered as much as answers, and that true wisdom came not from pride, but from humility before the vastness of the unknown. The riddle-guarded door of the Ravenclaw Tower became a perfect symbol of her philosophy. To enter, one had to think, not just know. Every student who approached had to prove their wit, a reminder that the mind must always remain awake. Rowena's brilliance was unmatched, but it came at a cost. She was often distant, lost in thought, her mind racing faster than those around her. Some said she was proud. Others said she was lonely. Her pursuit of knowledge sometimes pulled her away from those who loved her, and her story became one of both greatness and sorrow. Her daughter Helena inherited her beauty and sharpness, but also her independence. Tension grew between mother and daughter, for Rowena's expectations were high and Helena longed to escape her shadow. The tale of Helena Ravenclaw is one of the most haunting connected to Hogwarts. Desiring freedom and perhaps power of her own, Helena stole her mother's diadem, a crown said to enhance the wisdom of the wearer. She fled the castle and vanished into the forests of Europe. Rowena, stricken by grief yet too proud to admit her loss, sent the man who loved Helena to find her. That man was the Bloody Baron. Fierce and desperate, he pursued Helena across distant lands, but when she rejected him, his passion turned violent, and he killed her in rage before taking his own life. Their spirits returned to Hogwarts, bound forever to the school they could not leave behind. Helena became the Grey Lady, ghost of Ravenclaw Tower, silent and sorrowful, while the Baron roamed Slytherin's dungeons, chained to his guilt. Rowena herself did not live long after. Some say it was a broken heart that ended her days, grief for her daughter, and shame for the diadem she lost. Others claim it was illness, though in the wizarding world, illness often has deeper causes than the body alone. Whatever the truth, her final years were marked by sadness, yet her legacy endured, greater than any sorrow. The diadem, lost with Helena, became one of the most coveted relics of Hogwarts. It was said to whisper wisdom to those who wore it, to sharpen their mind, to make clear what was clouded. Rowena had crafted it, not for glory, but as a tool, a symbol of her belief that the pursuit of knowledge should never end. Centuries later, it would be twisted by Voldemort into a Horcrux, but in her time it shone as a creation of beauty and brilliance. Within Hogwarts, her influence was everywhere. The library, vast and ever-growing, reflected her dedication to learning. The astronomy tower, high above the clouds, was said to be her favorite place, where she could look upon the stars and feel close to the mysteries she loved. The riddles of the Ravenclaw Tower tested wit and creativity. Even the Great Hall ceiling, enchanted to mirror the sky, carried her touch, for she believed students should be reminded that the universe was larger than themselves. Rowena Ravenclaw's greatest gift was not her spells or her relics, but the spirit she left behind. She taught that intelligence was not a prize but a responsibility, that knowledge must be shared, not hoarded, that true cleverness was not in showing off, but in seeking truth. Her students carried these lessons, becoming scholars, inventors, and leaders who shaped wizarding culture in ways often subtle but profound. Her story reminds us that brilliance can inspire but also isolate, that wisdom can light the way but cannot shield the heart from loss. Yet, despite her sorrow, her vision endured. Hogwarts itself is her monument, a living puzzle, a castle of mysteries waiting to be solved. Every shifting staircase, every hidden passage, every enchanted classroom carries her mark. And so, the four founders together left their legacy. Gryffindor with his courage, Slytherin with his cunning, Hufflepuff with her loyalty, and Ravenclaw with her wisdom. Their values became the four houses, their relics became treasures, their differences became rivalries. The school they built was both united and divided, a place of learning and of conflict, of harmony and of discord. From these roots, Hogwarts grew, carrying both light and shadow, both triumph and tragedy. The founding was complete, the castle alive, the students gathering, but the story of Hogwarts was only beginning. Centuries would pass, and the school would see joy, danger, change, and endurance. Secrets would lie hidden in its chambers, ghosts would wander its halls, and generations would call it home. The next chapter of its history would be shaped not by its creators, but by those who inherited their vision, by the young witches and wizards who walked the corridors and learned within its enchanted walls. With the four founders united, the vision of Hogwarts turned from dream into stone. The castle did not rise in a day, nor even in a year. It was a work of magic and will, of imagination and enchantment, of hands both mortal and immortal. Its foundations were laid in the highlands of Scotland, chosen for their remoteness, for the wildness of the land, for the natural magic that pulsed beneath the soil. Few Muggles ever wandered so far north, and those who did often spoke of strange mists, of lights that danced in the sky, of shapes that seemed to vanish when approached. Even before the first stone was placed, the land itself seemed to welcome secrecy. Rowena Ravenclaw's design gave the castle its shape. She envisioned towers rising like spears, walls that would stand against centuries of storm, staircases that would challenge students to think, and secret chambers that would only reveal themselves to those who sought them with wit. With her guidance, the very blueprint of Hogwarts was drawn not on parchment, but in enchanted patterns that hovered in the air. She traced glowing lines of light with her wand, showing where each hall would stretch, where the Great Hall would stand, where the towers would pierce the clouds. Godric Gryffindor brought strength to the task. He summoned creatures of stone to lift and shape the great blocks, commanded enchanted hammers to strike in rhythm, and guarded the site against any who dared. Tales say that trolls tried to attack during those early years, drawn by the sounds of construction, but Godric stood against them, sword blazing, until the creatures fled into the mountains. His courage was as much a part of the castle's making as the mortar that bound its walls. Salazar Slytherin contributed the deepest enchantments. He laid the wards that would hide the castle from Muggle eyes, wrapping it in illusions that made it appear as a ruin or simply vanish into mist. He carved tunnels and chambers below the earth, weaving secrecy into the very ground. Many of these passages were known to the other founders, practical routes for defense or storage, but one was kept for himself alone. The Chamber of Secrets, hidden so well that even his companions did not suspect it. Helga Hufflepuff made Hogwarts into a home. She worked with the house elves to charm the kitchens, to enchant hearths that would never go cold, to fill cupboards with food that replenished itself. She oversaw the creation of dormitories that were warm and welcoming, spaces that felt safe even when the winds howled against the windows. Her magic was quieter than the soaring towers or the deep wards, but it gave the school its heart, ensuring that every student would feel cared for. The Great Hall was the crown of their work. It was Rowena's idea to enchant the ceiling so that it mirrored the sky, bringing the heavens indoors, teaching students that the universe stretched above them always. Helga charmed the long tables so that food would appear in endless supply, carried up from the kitchens below. Godric insisted on the 4 long tables, one for each house, so that unity could be balanced with identity. Salazar, though already drifting into prideful silence, agreed to lend his magic, ensuring that the enchantments of the hall would endure as long as the school itself. The staircases were perhaps the most famous of Rowena's creations. She designed them to shift and move, to keep students alert, to remind them that learning was never a straight climb, but a twisting journey. With each enchantment, the castle grew more alive, suits of armor that marched on their own, portraits that moved and spoke, windows that showed not only the outside world, but sometimes dreams or warnings. The founders were not simply building stone walls, they were creating a living castle, a place where magic itself would be a teacher. Ghosts, too, were drawn to the new school. Whether by choice or by destiny, spirits began to linger in the halls, tethered to the castle's growing power. Some were tied to the founders themselves, like the Fat Friar and the Grey Lady, while others were older wanderers who found a resting place within the enchanted walls. In time, they became part of the school, guides and companions to the living, but even in those first years, their presence was felt. When the last stone was set, when the wards sealed the grounds, Hogwarts stood as a wonder unlike any other. It was both fortress and sanctuary, filled with secrets and yet open to children who needed it. From miles away, the castle could not be seen by Muggle eyes, hidden by enchantments that confused and misled. To a magical child, however, it shone like a beacon, calling them home. The first students who arrived walked with awe through its gates. They entered a hall where floating candles lit the air, where the ceiling showed the stars above, where food appeared as if by miracle. They climbed staircases that moved beneath their feet, wandered corridors where portraits whispered, and felt the castle's enchantments wrap around them like a cloak. They were no longer scattered, no longer afraid, but gathered into something great. And so Hogwarts lived, not only in stone, but in story. It became more than its founders, more than its walls, more than its wards. It became a place of belonging, a home for generations. Yet even in these earliest days, the seeds of rivalry had been sown. The 4 houses were united under one roof, but their differences ran deep, and the choices of the founders would echo far beyond their own lives. The school was built, but its history was only beginning, and the years to come would test the strength of both its walls and its spirit. When the castle stood complete, its towers reaching toward the sky and its walls thick with enchantments, the founders faced a question that would shape the identity of Hogwarts forever. How would they decide where each child belonged? Which students should study under which founder? Which traits should be nurtured in which way? At first, the idea seemed simple, that each founder could choose their own pupils, testing them by conversation, by instinct, by magical trials. Yet they knew this would not last. They would grow old, they would pass on, and who then would decide? How could the legacy of the 4 be preserved when the 4 were no longer there? It was Godric Gryffindor who offered the solution, though it took all 4 founders to make it real. He removed the battered hat from his own head, a simple pointed cap that had served him for years, and placed it upon the table in the Great Hall. He suggested that they enchant it, give it the wisdom of their minds, the voices of their values, so that even when they were gone, the hat could continue their work. The others agreed, each adding their own thoughts, their own spirit, their own idea. Together they cast spells so powerful that the hat itself became alive, aware, able to look into the minds of children and see the truth of who they were. The first time the Sorting Hat spoke, the founders were startled. Its brim opened like a mouth, its voice carried through the hall, and it sang of the four houses, of the courage of Gryffindor, the wisdom of Ravenclaw, the loyalty of Hufflepuff, the ambition of Slytherin. The students sat in awe, for never before had a simple hat spoken with such authority. From that day on, each new arrival to Hogwarts would sit upon the stool, the hat lowered over their head, and the decision made, sometimes quickly, sometimes with long deliberation, but always guided by the values of the founders. The hat did not only see talent, it looked deeper, into desire, into fear, into potential. It could sense not just who a child was, but who they might become. This power gave it a wisdom even the founders lacked, for it could see across generations, across possibilities. At times the choice was clear, at others it wavered, whispering of more than one path. Some students begged for one house, some resisted another, and the hat listened, weighing choice against destiny. Its voice could be stern or kind, challenging or reassuring, but always it spoke the truth of the child beneath it. In those early years, the Sorting Hat became a symbol of fairness. No longer did the founders need to argue over which students to claim. No longer did bloodline or family name carry as much weight. The hat saw beyond surface and judged by spirit, muggle-borns, pure-bloods, half-bloods. It mattered little. The hat looked for courage, for wit, for loyalty, for ambition. In this way, the ideals of the founders endured long after their disagreements drove them apart. The ceremony itself grew into a tradition. On the first night of each year, new students would gather in the Great Hall, trembling with nerves, their eyes drawn to the enchanted ceiling, their hearts pounding as they awaited their turn. One by one they sat upon the stool, the Sorting Hat placed upon their head, its voice heard only by them. Some laughed, some cried, some argued with it, but in the end a decision was always made. When the hat shouted its choice, the table of that house erupted in cheers, arms thrown wide to welcome the new member. Thus each child found not only a school but a family within the walls. The Sorting Hat itself grew fond of its role. It sang each year a new song, sometimes light and joyful, sometimes grave and warning. It reminded students of the founders, of their strengths and their quarrels, of the values that bound the school together, and the dangers of division. Through its songs, the hat became not only a sorter, but a storyteller, carrying the memory of the founders into every generation. For the students, the houses quickly became more than divisions. They were sources of pride, of rivalry, of identity. A Gryffindor child boasted of bravery, a Ravenclaw of wit, a Hufflepuff of loyalty, a Slytherin of ambition. Friendships formed across houses, but competitions sharpened the bonds within them. Points awarded for success, taken for failure, became a game that drove students to strive. The Great Hall banners shifting at the end of each year, showing the House Cup winner, turned the sorting into a lifelong badge of honor. Yet even in these earliest years, the seeds of conflict remained. The hat could not erase the differences between founders, it could only echo them. Some parents praised Slytherin's strict standards, others whispered fear about them. Some children longed for Ravenclaw's tower, others dreaded its riddles. The Sorting Hat itself sometimes worried, for it could feel the tension left behind by the founders' disagreements. Its songs hinted at unity, warning that the school must remain one despite the four houses. Still, the ceremony endured. Year after year, binding students to Hogwarts in a way no lesson could. To wear the sorting hat was to feel the presence of the founders themselves, to be judged not by chance but by character. It gave each child a place, a table, a dormitory, a banner to cheer, and in that belonging they found courage to face the challenges ahead. The sorting hat remains one of the most remarkable enchantments ever created, a relic of the founding that continues to speak with the voices of its creators. It is not flawless, nor does it claim to be, but it endures, as much a part of Hogwarts as its stones and towers. It has seen generations rise and fall, wars and peace, triumphs and tragedies, yet still it sings each year. Still it places each child where they may grow best. And so Hogwarts moved forward, no longer just a castle but a living school, filled with children sorted into 4 houses, living under the guidance of 4 visions. From this structure came traditions, rivalries, and unity alike. The castle echoed with laughter, with footsteps, with lessons, and with the first true sense that Hogwarts was not only a refuge, but a community. But the castle held more than students and teachers. Beyond its gates lay forests and lakes, mountains and caves, places filled with creatures both wondrous and dangerous. Hogwarts was not only shaped by its founders, but by the magical beings who shared its grounds. The Forbidden Forest, the Black Lake, the ghosts and guardians, all became part of its story. The next chapter in the history of Hogwarts belongs to the creatures who dwelled alongside the students, shaping the life of the school in ways both gentle and perilous. With the sorting hat in place and the Great Hall alive with light and song, the first children of Hogwarts began their lives as students. These early generations were unlike those who would come centuries later, for they were stepping into a new world with no tradition to guide them, no long history to lean upon. They were pioneers, the first to climb the staircases that shifted beneath their feet, the first to sit in classrooms where magic was taught in an organized way, the first to feel what it meant to belong to a house. Their experiences laid the foundations for all who would follow. The earliest students came from across Britain and Ireland, from small villages, from lonely farms, from families that barely understood what their children were. Many had grown up hiding their powers, frightened of what would happen if Muggles discovered them. Others came from magical families who had passed down spells for generations, proud to send their sons and daughters to a real school at last. They arrived on foot, by cart, even by boat across the locks, long before the Hogwarts Express existed. Some were escorted by their parents, others traveled alone, guided only by letters that promised a safe haven in the north. To these children, the castle was overwhelming. Imagine stepping from a humble hut or cottage into a hall where the ceiling reflected the heavens, where food appeared in endless feasts, where portraits moved and ghosts glided past, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Their fear quickly turned to wonder. They whispered in excitement as they sat beneath the sorting hat. They gasped as staircases carried them to unexpected places. They clung to each other as they learned that their world was far bigger and stranger than they had ever dreamed. Life in the early years of Hogwarts was simple compared to the centuries that followed, yet filled with marvels. Lessons were taught directly by the founders themselves. Gryffindor oversaw defense against the dark arts, teaching students to duel, to face their fears, to stand tall even against terrifying odds. Slytherin taught the darker arts of wards and cunning enchantments, showing his pupils how to control magic with precision and to see beyond what was obvious. Hufflepuff taught charms and herbology, guiding her students in spells that nurtured, healed, and protected. Ravenclaw lectured on transfiguration, astronomy, and magical theory, pushing her pupils to think not only of how but of why. Each founder brought their own style, and each house reflected their vision. The students themselves shaped the school with their energy. They played in the courtyards, discovered hidden passages, and filled the dormitories with chatter late into the night. Friendships bloomed across houses, though rivalries grew quickly too. Gryffindors and Slytherins often clashed. Even then, their tempers and ambitions sparking quarrels that echoed down the corridors. Ravenclaws kept themselves apart at times, driven by their studies, while Hufflepuffs became the glue, welcoming all, mending quarrels, offering kindness. From the very beginning, the balance of houses defined student life. Daily routines grew into traditions. In the mornings, the Great Hall filled with bread, porridge, fruit, and warm milk, enchanted to appear as if the kitchens below were alive with invisible hands. After breakfast, students climbed the shifting staircases to their classes, clutching books bound in leather and scrolls tied with string. They learned to write with quills that scratched across parchment, practiced spells with wands that sparked or fizzed when handled clumsily, and listened in awe as their teachers demonstrated charms that seemed impossible. At night, they returned to their dormitories, where common rooms glowed with firelight and windows showed the moonlit grounds. For children who had known fear and loneliness, it was like stepping into a dream. Not all was easy. Magic was difficult, sometimes dangerous. Cauldrons exploded, wands backfired, charms went wrong in ways that left students coughing smoke or sprouting feathers. Ghosts startled the unwary. The bloody baron frightened even the bravest. Peeves, the poltergeist, caused endless mischief. Rules were created quickly, forbidding students from wandering into the forbidden forest or from dueling unsupervised. Though few obeyed completely, discipline was firm, especially from Slytherin, who valued control, and Gryffindor, who demanded honor. Yet Hufflepuff often softened punishments, and Ravenclaw gave second chances to those who showed a love of learning. Quidditch had not yet been invented, but children still found ways to fly. Broomsticks were crude in those days, stiff twigs bound together, lacking the smooth enchantments of later centuries. Students would sneak onto the grounds and race across the fields, wobbling through the air, laughing as they tried to stay aloft. The founders frowned at the recklessness, but secretly admired the joy it brought. Flying soon became a lesson of its own, though only the boldest dared it. Some of the earliest students became legends themselves. A boy named Emeric the Evil, sorted into Slytherin, grew into a dark wizard feared across Britain, remembered for his duels and his cruelty. Another, Bowman Wright of Ravenclaw, would one day invent the golden snitch. Many more lived quieter lives, returning to their villages with knowledge that helped their families, curing illness, protecting crops, defending their communities. Whether famous or forgotten, all carried a piece of Hogwarts with them, shaping the wider wizarding world. The early years were also marked by discovery. Students explored the castle endlessly, uncovering hidden rooms, secret tunnels, and magical surprises left by the founders. They found staircases that led nowhere, doors that appeared only when needed, enchanted suits of armor that saluted as they passed. They learned the rhythm of the castle, which seemed alive, its walls shifting subtly, its magic responding to those who walked within. To be a student then was to live in a constant state of wonder. Yet, even among the joy, the shadow of division lingered. Whispers of Slytherin's disdain for Muggle-born spread among the children. Gryffindor defended them, Hufflepuff comforted them, Ravenclaw encouraged them, but the unease remained. Some students felt pride in their heritage, others felt shame, and the seeds of conflict that began with the founders continued among their pupils. Still, the bonds of friendship and the shared awe of learning often overcame these divisions, at least for a time. As the years passed, traditions deepened. The sorting ceremony became an event of excitement each autumn. The feasts grew more elaborate, and the first attempts at a house point system began. Simple tokens of victory or discipline soon evolved into the competition that would define student pride for centuries. The earliest house cup was nothing more than a carved goblet, yet it became a treasure fiercely contested. So, Hogwarts lived through its first generations of children, shaping and being shaped by them. The founders taught, the students learned, and the castle grew full of voices and footsteps. What began as an idea had become a living school, rich with life, rich with promise. Those early boys and girls carried the story of Hogwarts into the world, spreading its name, making it known that a place existed where magical children could find safety, friendship, and purpose. And around the castle, beyond its walls, the grounds themselves began to whisper with enchantment. The forbidden forest grew thick and dark, filled with creatures of wonder and danger. The Black Lake stretched wide, hiding secrets beneath its surface. The land around Hogwarts was alive, and the creatures who dwelled there became part of its story, shaping the lives of students as much as the founders did. The next chapter in the history of Hogwarts belongs to these beings, guardians, companions, and threats, whose presence made the castle not only a place of learning, but a place of endless mystery. Beneath the laughter of students, beneath the shifting staircases and the warmth of the Great Hall, the castle of Hogwarts held secrets even its first children did not suspect. Some of those secrets were harmless, hidden doors that opened only when tickled, staircases that tricked the unwary, portraits that whispered forgotten names. But one secret was darker, deeper, and more dangerous than all the rest. It was the secret of Salazar Slytherin, carved into stone below the foundations, a chamber hidden from his fellow founders and from all who walked above. The Chamber of Secrets was born from Slytherin's vision of purity. He feared Muggle-borns, mistrusted their presence, and though he left Hogwarts, his suspicion remained. Before he departed, he built his legacy in stone and magic, concealing it so cleverly that no one else could find it. The entrance was hidden, sealed by Parseltongue, a language only he and his descendants could speak. Those who could not converse with serpents would never unlock its doors. Inside, deep beneath the castle, he placed a creature of terror, a basilisk, bred to obey his call. It was not meant for the present but for the future, a weapon waiting for the day when Slytherin's heir would return. Legends say that the chamber was vast, lined with stone pillars carved into the shapes of serpents, their eyes glinting in the torchlight. At its far end stood a statue of Slytherin himself, tall and severe, his beard flowing like roots into the floor, his mouth twisted with pride. From his likeness the basilisk would emerge, a monster that could kill with a glance, that could turn a castle of children into stone with a single sweep of its gaze. To the heir of Slytherin, it was a gift of power. To all others, it was a curse that slept in silence. For centuries, the chamber lay undisturbed. Students walked the halls above, laughing, learning, living their lives, never knowing that below their feet, in the cold, dark earth, a creature lay waiting. Some whispered rumors of its existence, for secrets have a way of leaking even from stone. Old students told tales of a hidden place, of Slytherin's private chamber, of a monster that would rise one day. Many dismissed it as story, as superstition, yet the whispers never fully died. They were passed from one generation to the next, a ghost of fear that clung to the House of the Serpent. The other founders knew nothing of the chamber's true nature. They suspected Slytherin's secrecy. They knew he had left behind hidden paths, but none guessed he had placed such a danger within their school. Even Rowena, whose mind pierced many mysteries, found nothing. The walls of the chamber were too deep, too specific, too bound to the tongue of snakes. And so Hogwarts grew. Century after century, While the basilisk remained hidden, its body growing larger in the dark, its fangs sharper, its gaze more deadly. Every so often, strange events stirred memory of the legend. Pipes whispered at night, shadows moved where none should be, animals disappeared into cracks. Students whispered of hissing voices, though most laughed it off. Professors calmed fears with reason, reminding them that castles were full of noises, that magic could play tricks. But beneath the reassurance, the old story lived on. The chamber remained more than stone. It became a myth, a warning, a half-remembered truth that waited for discovery. What Slytherin truly intended will never be fully known. Did he imagine that one day his bloodline would reclaim the school, purge it of all he despised, and rule it with the basilisk as his instrument? Or was the chamber simply an act of spite, a secret curse left behind to haunt those who defied him? Whatever his motive, the result was the same. He had bound danger to the heart of Hogwarts, and the castle would never be entirely free of it. The existence of the chamber also shaped the way Slytherin House was seen. Though many students of that house lived with honor, becoming healers, inventors, leaders, the shadow of their founder's secret lingered. Other houses whispered that Slytherins were untrustworthy, that they carried the same pride and cruelty. This suspicion, unfair though it often was, created divisions that hardened through centuries. Friendships strained, rivalries deepened, and the legend of the chamber became another stone in the wall that separated the houses. And yet, the chamber was also a reminder of something greater. It showed that Hogwarts was alive with mysteries, that the founders had built more than they admitted, that the castle itself was a puzzle never fully solved. Students grew up with the thrill of exploring, of wondering what else might be hidden behind the walls. They searched for secret rooms, for passageways that led to forgotten towers, for staircases that ended in locked doors. The Chamber of Secrets was the greatest of these mysteries, a dark heart at the core of the school. For the time being, however, it slept. The basilisk lay coiled in darkness, unseen, its power waiting. The whispers of its existence continued, frightening younger students, thrilling older ones, but no one truly believed the monster would rise. Hogwarts carried on. Children studied spells, feasted beneath the enchanted ceiling, played in the courtyards, and lived their lives above the slumbering danger. Generations came and went, teachers aged and were replaced, traditions deepened, while below their feet the secret chamber remained untouched. And so the story of Hogwarts unfolded with both light and shadow. Its founders gave it brilliance and hope, but also division and danger. It was a place of safety, yet beneath its safety lay secrets that could destroy it. This dual nature became the essence of the school. It was both home and fortress, both sanctuary and labyrinth, both place of learning and place of fear. And as the centuries passed, the magical beings who shared its grounds, who lived in its forests and lakes, added to this complex story, weaving their lives into the history of Hogwarts itself. The castle itself was alive with enchantments, yet it was never meant to stand alone. From the very beginning, the grounds of Hogwarts were home to creatures that belonged as much to its history as the four houses. Some were gentle, others dangerous, some born of the wild and some shaped by magic. The founders did not drive them away, for they believed the school should exist in harmony with the living world around it. The loch, the forest, the hills, and the caverns all carried old magic, and within that magic dwelled beings who would shape the daily lives of students and teachers for centuries. The Forbidden Forest, dark and deep, was already ancient when the first stone of the castle was laid. Tall trees pressed so close together that little light reached the ground, and within their shadows lived creatures out of story and legend. Unicorns roamed in silver herds, their hooves barely touching the earth, their manes shining with light even at midnight. To see one was considered a blessing, and the early students who caught glimpses of them whispered of it for years. The centaurs lived there too, proud and mysterious, gazing at the stars through the breaks in the canopy, reading omens in the heavens. They spoke little to humans, even to wizards, for they valued their independence, yet the founders made a pact with them, promising that the forest would remain theirs, that no student would trespass without reason. This pact gave birth to the rule that still stands, the warning that no student is permitted to enter the forest, a rule often broken but always remembered. Not all the creatures of the forest were friendly. Werewolves stalked the shadows, drawn by the wildness of the place. Acromantulas, enormous spiders with fangs that dripped venom, built their webs among the high branches, spinning strands as strong as rope. Trolls wandered the deeper paths, their clubs heavy and their tempers short. To the founders, the forest was both a danger and a test. They knew it could never be tamed, but they also knew that learning magic meant learning respect for power beyond one's own. And so the forest remained, forbidden but present, a constant reminder that magic was not only books and spells but wildness and risk. The Black Lake, stretching wide beside the castle, held its own wonders. The water was deep and dark, its surface often shrouded in mist. Beneath it lived creatures as old as the highlands themselves. The giant squid was among them, a creature of enormous size that could pull a boat with a flick of its tentacles. Yet, unlike the dangerous beasts of the forest, the squid was gentle, more curious than cruel, sometimes lifting stranded students back into their boats, sometimes spraying water in playful bursts that made children laugh. The lake was also home to merpeople, with long hair that floated around their stern faces, their eyes large and unblinking, their songs strange and haunting. They kept to their villages beneath the waves, but their presence was felt in the ripples of the lake and in the eerie music that sometimes drifted up at night. Grindylows lurked in the shallows, sharp-clawed and dangerous, waiting for the careless, reminding students that water too carried peril. Within the castle itself lived beings who would become part of its character. The house elves, brought by Helga Hufflepuff, filled the kitchens and corridors, working tirelessly yet willingly, finding purpose in service. Unlike the elves who labored in chains for cruel masters elsewhere, those at Hogwarts were treated with respect, given food, shelter, and safety. They kept the fires burning, prepared the feasts, cleaned the halls, and maintained the enchantments. Their presence made Hogwarts unique, a place where magic and kindness met, where beings once mistreated found a home. Then there were the ghosts. Some had lived and died within the castle, others were drawn to it by its power. The Fat Friar, cheerful and kind, took up residence in Hufflepuff House, guiding young students with laughter and warmth. Nearly Headless Nick, a nobleman whose failed execution left him wandering the halls with a head almost severed, became the ghost of Gryffindor Tower. The Grey Lady, the sorrowful spirit of Helena Ravenclaw, drifted through her mother's tower, a silent presence who knew secrets others could not guess. The Bloody Baron, covered in silver bloodstains, haunted Slytherin's dungeons, terrifying students yet serving as a reminder of guilt and loss. These ghosts were not merely echoes, they became companions to the living, their stories part of the lessons of Hogwarts. Other guardians filled the halls as well. Suits of armor enchanted by Rowena and Godric patrolled the corridors, their metal clanking with every step, ready to defend the school if danger came. Statues whispered warnings, staircases tested attention, and even the portraits themselves became watchful allies, carrying messages meets towers, guiding lost students, offering advice in times of need. The castle was never silent. It breathed and moved, filled with voices both human and not. The early students learned quickly that Hogwarts was not only a place of learning, but a place of respect. They were taught to honor the creatures of the forest, to treat the house elves with gratitude, to listen to the wisdom of the ghosts. They were warned of dangers, yet also shown wonders, to glimpse a unicorn, to hear mermaid song, to see a suit of armor bow as you passed. These were memories that stayed with them for life. In this way, the creatures of Hogwarts became as much a part of its story as the founders. They shaped the daily lives of students. They added to the magic of the castle. They gave the school its atmosphere of wonder and mystery. Even the dangers served a purpose, reminding all who studied there that magic was not a thing to be taken lightly, that respect and caution must always walk beside curiosity and courage. And so the early centuries of Hogwarts were filled with this mingling of human and magical life. Students learned spells by day and whispered stories of the forest by night. They shared the Great Hall with ghosts. They felt the watchful eyes of portraits. They grew up in a castle alive with magic in every corner. It was a place like no other, a place where learning meant not only books and wands, but living with the wonders and dangers of the magical world. But as time passed and generations grew, traditions began to settle. And with tradition came memory. The stories of the founders were told and retold, their values sung each year by the Sorting Hat, their relics whispered about in corridors. Among those relics were 4 objects, each tied to its creator, each carrying enchantments that outlived their makers. The next chapter in the story of Hogwarts belongs to these artifacts. Treasures that would one day play roles far greater than even the founders could have foreseen. For the first students of Hogwarts, the castle seemed like the whole world, its towers rising higher than any they had known, its corridors stretching further than any home they had left behind. Yet outside those walls, the wider wizarding world continued to change, and Hogwarts soon found itself not just a school but a center of influence that reached far beyond Scotland. The founders may have built it as a sanctuary for learning, but the mere existence of such a place reshaped how witches and wizards across Britain lived, gathered, and understood themselves. In the years before Hogwarts, magic was scattered and often feared. Families passed spells in secret. Villages whispered of healers who could cure with a touch or ruin with a curse, and muggles treated anything unexplained with suspicion. A central place of teaching created something new, a generation of young witches and wizards who shared the same lanes, who grew with the same traditions, who carried the same stories when they returned to their homes. Slowly but surely, Hogwarts became more than a school. It became a symbol, a heart around which wizarding society could begin to form. Parents who had once feared their children's powers now looked to the castle with hope. To send a child there meant safety, education, and community. Muggle-borns, once left alone and confused, could find their place, discover that they were not cursed or broken, but gifted, pure-blood families, proud of their heritage, found their children trained in arts far beyond what they could teach at home. Hogwarts gave structure to lives that had once been chaotic, and that structure spread outward, into villages, into families, into the way the magical world began to see itself as a connected whole. The castle also became a place of gathering for adults, not just children. Wizards traveled to its gates to consult with the founders, to ask advice, to trade knowledge. The Great Hall was sometimes used for councils, where disputes between magical clans were settled. Rowena Ravenclaw's wisdom was sought on matters of law. Godric Gryffindor's courage was admired in conflicts. Helga Hufflepuff's fairness was trusted in judgments. And even Salazar Slytherin, before he left, was valued for his cunning solutions. The presence of Hogwarts meant that Wizarding Britain began to organize itself not only by bloodline, but by community, and the castle stood at the center. The existence of Hogwarts also changed the way witches and wizards related to muggles. While the school itself was hidden, the gathering of so many magical children in one place drew attention. Locals spoke of strange lights in the hills, of music in the air, of figures vanishing into mist. Some feared, some worshipped it, some avoided it altogether. The founders worked tirelessly to maintain secrecy, weaving stronger wards, inventing new charms to mislead wandering eyes. But the balance was delicate. The creation of a great magical fortress brought both safety and risk, for it reminded the Muggle world that something unusual existed, even if they could never see it clearly. Students leaving Hogwarts carried their knowledge into every corner of Britain and beyond. Some became leaders of magical communities, shaping villages where wizards could live together in safety. Others became wanderers, spreading spells across Europe, linking Hogwarts with other centers of magic on the continent. Stories of the Scottish castle spread to Ireland, to France, to the far north. And while other schools existed, Hogwarts soon earned a reputation as one of the finest. Its reputation grew not only from its teaching but from the legends of its founders, whose names were already becoming myth. The wider world also pressed back upon Hogwarts. Witch hunts began to stir in Muggle lands. Dark wizards rose and fell. Plagues swept through villages. In these times, the castle became both refuge and fortress. Students were kept safe within its walls, while teachers ventured out to aid communities, to heal the sick, to drive away threats. Godric Gryffindor himself was said to have led missions against dark covens, while Helga Hufflepuff organized networks of witches to provide food and healing to those in need. Hogwarts was never isolated. Even though it was hidden, it breathed with the same struggles as the world around it. Trade in magical goods also flourished because of the school. Wand makers, potion masters, and merchants found demand rising as generations of trained witches and wizards sought supplies. Families needed cauldrons, parchment, spellbooks, broomsticks, all of which fed a growing economy of magic. Though Diagon Alley would not exist for centuries, the seeds of such markets were planted in these early days, driven by the common experience of Hogwarts students returning home with stories and skills that reshaped their communities. Politically, Hogwarts began to play a subtle role. Leaders of wizarding clans sent their children to the school, and friendships formed there often shaped alliances later in life. Rivalries too were born, sometimes lasting generations, for the house divisions ran deeply. A quarrel between a Gryffindor and a Slytherin in childhood could echo into disputes between families decades later. Yet despite rivalries, a sense of shared identity also emerged. Wizards across Britain began to see themselves as part of something larger, as members of a culture that extended from the Highlands to the southern shores. Through all this, Hogwarts maintained its purpose. Children continued to arrive each year, some nervous, some eager, all stepping into a world of wonder. They left years later carrying knowledge that bound them to the castle forever. And though the school was not yet the political power it would later become, it had already become the center of magical life in Britain. No wizard could ignore its existence. No family could deny its influence. No generation could escape its reach. The castle that began as a dream of 4 visionaries was becoming the foundation of an entire society. It stood as both a sanctuary and a symbol, a place where the magical and the ordinary worlds touched without ever fully meeting. Its students carried its lessons into the future, shaping the wizarding world with every spell they cast, every community they built, every law they made. And while the castle reached outward into the world, it also looked inward. Its library grew with every passing year, filling shelves with books of spells and histories, guarded by enchantments and restricted to those who proved worthy. The knowledge gathered there would become as important as the people, for it preserved centuries of wisdom and danger alike. The next chapter in the story of Hogwarts belongs to this library, a place of endless discovery, and to the forbidden knowledge that lay hidden in its darker corners. From the earliest days of Hogwarts, the founders knew that knowledge would be the lifeblood of the school. They taught lessons in the classrooms and shared wisdom in the Great Hall. Yet they also understood that a true education required more than words spoken aloud. It required books, scrolls, and records to preserve spells for centuries to come. So the library was built, not as a simple room, but as a vast hall with walls lined by towering shelves, ladders that rolled from end to end, and tables where students could bend over parchment until candles burned low. It was Rowena Ravenclaw who designed it, believing that knowledge should be stored and guarded, and it was Helga Hufflepuff who ensured it was always open to any student willing to learn. At first, the collection was small, a few hundred volumes donated by the founders and by visiting families who wished to support the school. These books were precious, copied by hand, enchanted to resist fire, water, and decay. They contained spells for healing, for transformation, for defense, and for everyday life. As the years passed, the shelves filled with more and more volumes. Travelers returned from distant lands carrying new writings. Families passed down grimoires that had been kept in secret. Scholars donated treatises in hopes of preserving their names. The library became a treasure chest of magic, a place where the wisdom of ages gathered under one roof. The atmosphere of the library was unlike any other part of the castle. Silence reigned there, broken only by the soft turning of pages or the scratching of quills. Candles floated between the shelves, glowing gently, never flickering into smoke. The portraits of old scholars watched from the walls, their painted eyes following students who reached for certain books. The smell of parchment and ink mixed with the faint scent of enchantments, for the books themselves seemed alive, humming softly, shifting on the shelves as if eager to be read. Not all knowledge, however, was safe. Alongside charms and transfiguration lay spells of darker nature, curses, enchantments that bent the will, potions that poisoned. These were not placed in the open, but locked away in a section at the far end of the library, behind a rope that carried an enchantment of warning. This was the restricted section, created by the founders themselves to guard against misuse. Only students with permission could enter, and even then only under supervision. To cross into that space without leave was to invite both punishment and danger. The restricted section became a place of whispers and dares. Students spoke of books that screamed when opened, of volumes bound in leather that seemed to breathe, of pages that shifted their words when read by the unworthy. Some of these tales were true. One book contained curses so strong that reading them aloud could scar the tongue. Another carried a charm that trapped the reader in visions of madness unless they knew the counterspell. Still another whispered temptations in the night, promising power to any who would simply repeat its incantations. The founders had debated what to do with such dangerous knowledge. To destroy it would be to lose understanding forever, but to leave it unguarded would be to invite disaster. Their compromise was to keep it, but keep it sealed, where only the wise and responsible could reach it. The restricted section became not only a safeguard, but a symbol. It reminded students that knowledge was not neutral. It could heal or harm, protect or corrupt. Every spell carried responsibility. Every potion required wisdom. To study magic was to walk a path between light and darkness, and the library showed this truth more clearly than any lesson. Students who ventured too close to the rope felt a chill, as if the books themselves were watching, testing their resolve. Over time, the library developed its own law. Certain books were said to move of their own accord, sliding along the shelves to avoid being found. Some vanished entirely, only to reappear decades later. Others resisted being copied, their ink fading when quills tried to duplicate them. The librarian, always a stern figure, became guardian of these mysteries, patrolling the aisles, keeping watch over the eager and the reckless alike. The post of librarian carried great weight, for it was not only about organizing shelves, but about guarding centuries of knowledge that could change the world. For students, the library was a place of both wonder and trial. Many spent hours bent over books of charms, their faces lit by candlelight, their fingers stained with ink. They discovered spells that made flowers bloom in winter, charms that mended broken glass, transfigurations that turned pebbles into mice. Yet, just as often they stumbled upon warnings, on passages that hinted at deeper power locked away, at secrets just beyond their reach. Curiosity tugged at them, tempting them to peek into places forbidden. Some resisted, others did not. Punishments for sneaking into the restricted section were harsh, yet the thrill never faded, and the stories of those who tried became part of Hogwarts folklore. The library also became a sanctuary. Students found refuge there during storms, during quarrels, during moments when they felt lost. Its silence was a balm, its shelves a reminder that countless minds had come before, that wisdom stretched across centuries. Ghosts sometimes drifted between the shelves, pausing to read, though they no longer had need of books. Even the suits of armor seemed quieter when passing by its doors, as if the library commanded respect from all who dwelled in the castle. In this way, the library became more than a collection of volumes. It became the memory of Hogwarts, a place where knowledge endured when people passed away, where stories and spells were preserved against time. It stood as a testament to the founders' belief that learning was the true foundation of magic. Yet, it also carried the warning that not all knowledge should be sought, that wisdom lay not only in discovery, but in restraint. And so Hogwarts continued to grow, its students passing year after year through the library's doors, its shelves filling with new works, its restricted section whispering from the shadows. It was a place of light and of darkness, of wonder and of fear, a reflection of the castle itself. And as the relics of the founders passed into legend, the library preserved their names, their teachings, and their warnings. The next chapter belongs to those relics, the treasures each founder left behind, which would outlive them and shape the destiny of Hogwarts in ways none could have foreseen. As Hogwarts settled into its rhythm, as generations of students filled its halls and the library grew heavy with knowledge, stories began to circle about 4 objects of great power. Each was tied to a founder. Each carried enchantments beyond the skill of ordinary witches and wizards, and each became a symbol of the values they had left behind. These relics were more than heirlooms, more than treasures. They were extensions of the founders themselves, reminders of their presence long after their voices had faded from the Great Hall. The sword of Gryffindor was perhaps the most famous. Forged by goblins, gleaming with silver light, and inlaid with rubies that burned like flame, it was a weapon of unmatched quality. Goblin silver was known to drink what made it stronger, to absorb power without losing its own purity. And so the sword grew mightier with every battle it faced. Godric carried it proudly, not for conquest but for protection. He defended villages against raiders. He stood against dark wizards. He carved his name into legend with its shining blade. When he left it to Hogwarts, he did so with a charm that bound it forever to the House of the Lion. The sword would present itself in times of need, appearing to any true Gryffindor who required it. Centuries later, it would indeed shine again, proving that Godric's courage could never be buried. Rowena Ravenclaw's relic was her diadem, a delicate crown of silver and sapphire, said to enhance the wisdom of its wearer. Crafted with elegance and enchanted with brilliance, it whispered to the mind, clarifying thought, sharpening wit, making cleverness bloom into genius. Rowena wore it in her lectures, her eyes bright as she guided her students, her words sharp and inspiring. Yet the diadem story turns sorrowful when her daughter Helena stole it, fleeing the shadow of her mother. Rowena's loss and Helena's death gave the relic a tragic weight, and for centuries it was thought lost. Yet even in memory, it remained a symbol, the embodiment of Ravenclaw's endless pursuit of knowledge. Helga Hufflepuff left behind a cup, small and golden, simple compared to the sword or the diadem, yet filled with warmth and strength. It bore her badger crest and was enchanted to never tarnish, to always remain pure. Legends say it could brew any potion placed within it to perfection, that it could heal when filled with water, that it could multiply what was poured inside. Its true powers were never fully known, for Helga crafted it not to boast but to serve, a vessel of care, a reminder of abundance to her house. The cup represented her generosity, her belief that loyalty and fairness were treasures as valuable as any jewel. Salazar Slytherin's relic was his locket, heavy with gold engraved with serpents and charmed with layers of protection. It bore his initial, a proud S twined into its design, and within it lay enchantments known only to him. Passed down through his bloodline, it became a mark of heritage, proof of descent from the founder himself. To Slytherin, the locket was not mere ornament, but declaration, a statement that his legacy would endure through his family. Unlike the sword or the cup, it was not meant to serve the school, but to preserve his line, a reflection of his pride and his desire to shape the future long after his departure. These relics, together, told the story of the four: the courage of the sword, the wisdom of the diadem, the loyalty of the cup, the ambition of the locket. Students whispered about them, teachers guarded them, and their presence in the castle deepened the legend of the founders. They became more than objects. They became part of the identity of each house, tangible reminders that the values of the founders were not only words, but living powers. As centuries passed, the relics followed different paths. The sword remained within Hogwarts, appearing in times of danger, vanishing back into its hiding place when the crisis was done. The diadem disappeared, with Helena becoming a tale of loss that haunted Ravenclaw Tower. The cup was treasured by Hufflepuff's descendants, passed down until it too left the castle. The locket remained within the Slytherin line, its ownership shifting through generations, until it became a symbol of pride for those who claimed his blood. Each relic wandered, yet each carried with it the spirit of Hogwarts, the memory of its creation, the echo of the founders who had once held them. The relics also influenced the way students thought of their houses. To be a Gryffindor was to imagine the sword flashing in battle. To be a Ravenclaw was to dream of the diadem whispering wisdom. To be a Hufflepuff was to feel the comfort of the golden cup, a reminder that kindness was power. To be a Slytherin was to envision the locket, heavy with heritage, a sign of ambition and legacy. Even when the objects themselves were absent, their stories lived, shaping identity, fueling pride, sometimes feeding rivalry. The presence of these treasures gave Hogwarts a sense of permanence. Students knew that their founders had left pieces of themselves behind, that their values were not only remembered but embodied. To walk through the corridors was to feel the possibility that somewhere, hidden in the castle's depths, one of the relics might be resting, waiting for the worthy. This mystery added to the atmosphere of wonder, to the sense that Hogwarts was more than a school. It was a place where past and present met, where legends lingered in the shadows, where the spirit of the founders remained alive. Yet, as with all things of power, the relics also carried danger. Objects of such enchantment attracted greed, ambition, and darkness. To some they were symbols of pride. To others, they were prizes to be seized. And so their later history would be marked not only by inspiration but by corruption, by theft, by their use in ways the founders could never have imagined. But in these early centuries, they were still pure, still reminders of courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition. Thus, Hogwarts lived with its relics, with its library, with its creatures and ghosts. It was no longer just a castle, but a world, rich with meaning, filled with stories. And as generations grew, as centuries passed, more traditions were born. Feasts, points, songs, rivalries, victories, defeats, all became part of the rhythm of life within its walls. The castle was no longer young. It was beginning to take its place, not only as a school but as the beating heart of Wizarding Britain. As Hogwarts grew older, and its halls filled with the voices of new generations, not all who walked its corridors left them when their lives ended. From the earliest centuries, the castle became home not only to students and teachers, but also to spirits who chose to remain. These ghosts became part of the daily life of Hogwarts, their stories mingling with lessons and feasts, their presence turning the castle into a place where past and present coexisted in visible form. They were companions, teachers, warnings, and sometimes simply reminders that Hogwarts was a place where magic and memory could never be fully separated. The most cheerful of these spirits was the Fat Friar, bound forever to Hufflepuff House. In life, he had been a kind-hearted man of faith and magic, known for healing the sick, feeding the hungry, and welcoming any who came to his door. His generosity was legendary, though his tendency to use magic in ways his brothers frowned upon led to his death at the hands of those who mistrusted him. When he rose again as a ghost, he chose Hogwarts, drawn to the warmth of Helga Hufflepuff's legacy, and there he remained. He floated through the kitchens with a smile, greeted students with laughter, and always tried to lighten sorrow. To Hufflepuff children, he was not only a house ghost, but a friend, reminding them that kindness could endure even beyond death. In Gryffindor Tower, another spirit walked, more noble but also more tragic. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, known to students as Nearly Headless Nick, had once been a courtly wizard. His attempts at magical healing went disastrously wrong, leaving a noblewoman permanently disfigured, and for this mistake, he was sentenced to execution. The axe failed to do its work cleanly, leaving his head almost severed, hanging by sinew and skin, a wound that followed him into death. At Hogwarts, he found a new home, admired by Gryffindors for his courtly manners, sometimes mocked for his grisly wound, but always respected for his loyalty to his house. His presence reminded students that even the brave and noble could fail, that mistakes could haunt a lifetime and beyond, yet dignity could still be maintained. The ghost of Ravenclaw Tower was the Grey Lady, Helena Ravenclaw, daughter of Rowena herself. Her story was one of sorrow, of theft, of betrayal, of a life ended in tragedy. She had fled the castle with her mother's diadem, seeking freedom from the expectations placed upon her, only to be pursued and slain by the man who loved her, the one who would become the Bloody Baron. Her spirit returned to Hogwarts, unable to find peace, drifting through her mother's tower with a pale and silent presence. She spoke little, sharing her secrets only with those who earned her trust. To Ravenclaws, she became a figure of mystery, a reminder that even wisdom could not shield the heart from pain, that the pursuit of freedom could end in sorrow. Her tale wove tragedy into the history of the castle, her ghost embodying both pride and regret. The dungeons of Slytherin were haunted by the Bloody Baron, a figure as terrifying as his name. His silver bloodstains never faded, marking the violence of his death and the guilt he carried. In life, he had been fierce, ambitious, and unyielding, traits admired by Slytherin himself, but his love for Helena Ravenclaw ended in murder, his rage consuming him, and his own death followed swiftly after. As a ghost, he was grim, frightening even to his own house, his presence a weight of shame and punishment, yet he also commanded respect, for he kept order among Slytherins with authority no living teacher could match. His story linked house to house, binding Slytherin and Ravenclaw in tragedy, showing that the founder's legacy was never simple, never free of sorrow. Beyond the house ghosts, other spirits roamed the castle. Some were teachers who had died within its walls, choosing to remain as guides. Some were students whose lives had ended too soon, unwilling to leave the place that had been their home. The corridors were filled with flickers of white shadows that drifted through walls, echoes of laughter or sobs from centuries past. For many students, these ghosts were not frightening, but familiar, part of the fabric of Hogwarts, as ordinary as enchanted staircases or floating candles. And then there was Peeves, the poltergeist, neither ghost nor human spirit, but a creature of chaos born from the castle itself. Peeves was mischief incarnate, a spirit of disruption who cackled as he dropped water balloons on students, who mocked teachers, who delighted in disorder. No one ever knew why he had appeared, but it was said that the castle's own magic had given him form, as if Hogwarts itself desired a trickster among its walls. Unlike the ghosts, Peeves could be maddening, yet he was tolerated, for in his way he embodied the castle's refusal to be entirely tamed. The presence of ghosts made Hogwarts unique. Children who feared death learned to see it differently when they spoke daily with those who had passed. Lessons were taught not only by professors but by spirits who remembered ages long gone. The Grey Lady whispered of secrets in the tower. The Fat Friar guided lost students back to their dormitories. Nearly headless Nick cheered Gryffindors after defeat. The Bloody Baron warned Slytherins of arrogance. Death and life walked side by side, reminding all who studied there that magic could never sever the ties of memory. The ghosts also carried warnings. They were bound to Hogwarts, not by joy alone, but often by unfinished business, by regret, by guilt. Their presence showed that choices mattered, that mistakes could last beyond life, that what one did in youth might echo forever. Students grew up with these reminders, some comforted, some sobered, all aware that the castle itself remembered. And so Hogwarts lived not only in its students and teachers, not only in its relics and its library, but also in its ghosts. It became a place where the past was never gone, where the voices of those long dead still drifted through the corridors, where the laughter and sorrow of centuries blended into the present. To be a child at Hogwarts was to share your days with the living and the dead alike. To know that history was not just a story, but a presence around every corner. As centuries passed, the ghosts remained, watching, guiding, frightening, amusing, always part of the life of the school. And beyond them, the castle itself continued to grow in tradition. Thirsts became grander. The house point system took firm root. The Great Hall echoed with competition and celebration. The living and the dead, the past and the present, all mingled together, making Hogwarts more than a school, more than a castle, more than stone and spell. It became a community bound not only by magic but by memory, a place where history walked beside you, whispered in your ear, and reminded you that you were part of something far older and far greater than yourself. The Middle Ages were a time of turmoil across Britain and Europe, a time of plague, of wars, of suspicion, of kingdoms rising and falling. For Muggles it was an age of castles and crusades, of famine and fear, of whispers about witches in every village. For wizards it was a time of danger, for their powers were noticed too often, and the fires of persecution burned hot. In this storm, Hogwarts stood as a sanctuary, its walls shielding magical children from the chaos outside, its traditions growing stronger with each passing century. When the Black Death swept across Europe, killing millions, the castle became a refuge, not only for students, but for wizarding families desperate for protection. Magic could not cure every sickness, for disease was as much mystery to wizards as to muggles. Yet within Hogwarts, the children were safe. The wards kept plague bearers away, and Helga Hufflepuff's early enchantments of cleanliness and food preservation proved vital. The kitchens remained full even when fields failed. The fires burned steady, and the castle's high towers kept the air clear. Students who might have perished in their villages lived on, their laughter echoing through halls while the world outside fell silent. The memory of safety during those years bound the wizarding world to Hogwarts even more deeply. Witch hunts grew fierce in the Middle Ages, with muggles desperate to explain misfortune turning their anger toward those they suspected of sorcery. Villages drowned women in rivers, burned men at stakes, hunted children who behaved strangely. Many witches and wizards perished, but Hogwarts endured, its protections fooling even the most determined pursuers. When muggles stumbled upon the castle, they saw nothing but ruins, stones crumbling, air thick with dread, and they fled in terror. Within, students studied by candlelight, professors taught spells of defense, and the castle remained untouchable. Ghosts watched silently, portraits whispered warnings, and the walls themselves seemed to shift to guard their secret. In these centuries, Hogwarts grew more insular, more cautious, yet also more united. The houses still quarreled, but against the fear of the outside world they stood together. Students of every background found common cause in learning, in preparing to survive in a world that would never fully accept them. Gryffindors trained for battle, Ravenclaws searched for knowledge to conceal their kind, Hufflepuffs offered comfort, Slytherins plotted ways to protect their families. The Sorting Hat sang often of unity, warning that division would weaken them, reminding all that they were one school even if four houses. The Middle Ages also brought the rise of dueling. Wizards, both young and old, turned to combat magic to defend themselves, and Hogwarts became a training ground for skill with wands. Gryffindor's tradition of bravery lived on in students who practiced spells in the courtyards, turning lessons into contests into rivalries. Some duels were friendly, others bitter, but all sharpened ability. By the 15th century, dueling had become a formal practice across wizarding Britain, and its roots lay in the training grounds of Hogwarts. At the same time, knowledge grew. The library filled with texts brought back from distant lands, treatises on alchemy from Arabia, star charts from the East, charms from Italy. Ravenclaw Tower became a beacon of scholarship, its students scribbling notes late into the night, their eyes lit with the glow of magical lamps. Some of these works carried danger too, dark tomes hidden in the restricted section, yet they preserved understanding that would otherwise have been lost. Hogwarts was not only surviving the Middle Ages, it was gathering the wisdom of the wider world and keeping it safe for the future. Life within the castle took on rhythms that became tradition. The Great Hall filled with feasts to mark the turning of the seasons, roast meats and warm pies in winter, berries and cool drinks in summer. The house point system became firmly rooted, banners shifting in the hall to show which house led, cheers rising when points were awarded, groans when they were lost. Quidditch was not yet the game it would become, but early forms of broom racing filled the skies above the grounds, students daring each other to fly faster, higher, longer. Though the world outside was filled with fear, within Hogwarts there was joy, competition, discovery, and the steady march of learning. Yet shadows reached even into the castle. Dark wizards arose during these centuries, using forbidden spells to carve out power. Some had been students once, walking the same halls, eating the same meals, now turning their knowledge against their own kind. Teachers spoke of them in whispers, warning students of the path of arrogance, reminding them that knowledge without wisdom led only to ruin. The restricted section grew heavier with volumes of cursed writings confiscated from those who had fallen, and always beneath the stone the Chamber of Secrets slept. its basilisk growing larger, its legend passed from mouth to mouth. Through plague and persecution, through fire and sword, Hogwarts endured. Its walls held steady, its magic never faltered, its community survived. To the wizarding world, it became more than a school. It was a promise that their children would be safe, that their kind would not vanish, that their traditions would continue even when the Muggle world tried to burn them away. To step inside its gates was to feel history pressing close, to know that countless others had walked these halls before and had been protected by their strength. By the end of the Middle Ages, Hogwarts was no longer a fragile experiment of 4 founders. It was an institution, the heart of wizarding Britain, a place known across Europe, respected, envied, sometimes feared, but always enduring. It had survived plague, witch hunts, wars, and darkness, and it stood ready to face the centuries ahead. And with the turning of those centuries came not only survival but growth. The Forbidden Forest grew wilder, Quidditch began to take shape, and new subjects were added to the curriculum. The next chapter in the story of Hogwarts belongs to these traditions, to the Forbidden Forest in particular, a place that remained untamed even as the castle thrived. A reminder that magic could never be completely controlled, that some mysteries would always lie just beyond the edge of the firelight. Beyond the stone walls and high towers of Hogwarts lay a place older than the castle itself, a place that no spell could fully tame, a place that carried its own ancient magic. This was the great forest that stretched to the edge of the grounds, thick with trees, deep with shadows, alive with creatures both wondrous and terrible. From the earliest days, the students were warned to stay away, and from the earliest days many of them disobeyed. Drawn by the mystery that hung between the trunks, it became known as the Forbidden Forest, not because the founders wished to hide its beauty, but because they knew its dangers were greater than any classroom could teach. The forest was ancient, even in the 10th century, its oaks and beeches towering high, their roots twisting through the soil like veins. The ground was soft with moss, the air heavy with the smell of earth, and the canopy so thick that daylight barely touched the floor. At night it was darker still, the silence broken by howls, hooves, wings, and whispers. To step inside was to leave the safety of Hogwarts and enter a world that belonged not to humans but to creatures who had lived there long before the first brick of the castle was laid. Unicorns were among the most treasured inhabitants. They moved in silver herds, their coats gleaming even in the darkest night, their horns glowing faintly as if touched by starlight. Gentle and shy, they fled from most human contact. Yet sometimes a lucky student glimpsed them through the trees. Legends spread quickly whenever one was seen. Tales of luck and blessing, of purity and hope. To kill a unicorn was an act so vile that it cursed the drinker of its blood, a lesson impressed upon every student who heard the stories. In this way, the unicorns taught not through words but through presence, their very existence a reminder of the sacredness of life. The centaurs were the true guardians of the forest. Proud, mysterious, and wise, they studied the skies through the breaks in the canopy, reading omens in the stars, seeing patterns invisible to others. They did not bow to wizards, nor did they seek their company. They considered themselves separate, their ways older than human magic, their loyalty to the forest above all else. Still, they tolerated Hogwarts, for the founders had respected their independence and promised that the forest would remain there. From time to time, a student encountered a centaur, receiving riddling words, sometimes warnings, sometimes comfort, always leaving with the sense that they had touched something vast and ancient. Yet not all creatures of the forest were so noble. Acromantulas, monstrous spiders, the size of men, spun webs that glistened like ropes between trees. Their fangs dripped venom that killed in an instant. Their many eyes gleamed with cold intelligence. Even the bravest students dared not approach their lairs. Trolls too lurked in the deeper shadows, swinging clubs thicker than tree trunks, their tempers quick, their hunger great. Packs of werewolves sometimes prowled at the edges, drawn to the wild magic, their howls echoing through the night to chill the blood of any who heard them. The forest was also home to smaller beings, fairies that glittered like sparks, pixies that caused mischief, bowtruckles that guarded trees with sharp fingers, herds of the straws, skeletal winged horses visible only to those who had seen death, drifted silently among the paths, eerie yet strangely gentle. To some students they were frightening, to others they became companions, carrying carriages to the school gates, their leathery wings beating softly in the night. The forest was thus a place of contrasts, beauty and terror, wonder and fear. Professors used the forest carefully in their teaching. Care of magical creatures lessons sometimes took students to its edges, where they could study creatures under supervision. They learned the importance of respect, of caution, of humility in the face of power greater than their own. Yet the forest was never treated lightly. It was not a classroom, not a playground, but a realm of its own, to be entered only when necessary. The rule that students must not go into the forest without permission was as old as the school itself, and though it was broken often, the punishments were severe. Still, curiosity burned bright in young hearts, and many dared the shadows, returning with wide eyes and stories that became legends whispered in dormitory. For the castle, the forest was both a neighbor and a shield. Its vastness kept muggles away, its creatures deterred intruders, its wildness reminded students that Hogwarts was not the center of the world, but part of a much larger web of magic. The founders had chosen the site knowing this, for they believed the school should grow beside mystery, not in isolation. To live at Hogwarts was to live in the shadow of the forest, to hear its sounds at night, to wonder what moved in the darkness, to carry both fear and fascination every time one looked toward its edge. The forest also wove itself into the lore of Hogwarts. Songs were sung of unicorns glimpsed at dawn, of centaurs warning of storms, of students chased by creatures until rescued at the last moment. Ghosts spoke of their own encounters in centuries past. Portraits warned reckless children against venturing too far, and even the Sorting Hat hinted in its songs at the dangers that lay just beyond the gates. The forest was a living reminder that knowledge had limits, that courage required caution, that magic could never tame everything, and so the Forbidden Forest remained. Century after century, untamed and unyielding, it was both danger and wonder, both threat and teacher. Students grew up in its shadow, learned to respect its boundaries, and carried its memory with them long after leaving Hogwarts. To speak of the school was always to speak also of the forest, for the two were bound together, one of stone and light, the other of wood and shadow, one built by human hands, the other older than human memory. With the castle and the forest standing side by side, Hogwarts entered new centuries. Its traditions deepened, its reputation grew, and its influence reached further across the wizarding world. The Great Hall became the center of feasts, the enchanted ceiling reflecting the heavens, the house point system turning learning into competition, Quidditch emerging as the favorite pastime of daring students. These traditions shaped not only the rhythm of the school year, but the very identity of Hogwarts, carrying its spirit from generation to generation. If the Forbidden Forest reminded students of the untamed wildness beyond the walls, the Great Hall reminded them of the unity and warmth within. It was the beating heart of the castle, the place where every day began and ended, where students of all houses gathered beneath one enchanted ceiling, where meals, ceremonies, and celebrations wove together into traditions that defined life at Hogwarts. To step into the Great Hall was to feel at once part of a community larger than yourself, to hear the echo of voices blending, to see banners of every color waving above, to know you were home. The Great Hall was vast, its ceiling enchanted to reflect the sky outside. On clear nights, the stars shone as brightly indoors as they did above the castle. On stormy days, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled across the enchanted dome. And at dawn, soft colors of sunrise painted the hall in gold and pink. The enchantment was not only for beauty but for connection, reminding every student that beyond stone walls and magic, there was a wider world, a universe they were part of, vast and endless. This ceiling, first imagined by Rowena Ravenclaw, became one of the most beloved wonders of Hogwarts. 4 long tables stretched from end to end, one for each house, each draped with the colors of its founder. To sit at your house table was to feel a bond, to be welcomed by cheers when the Sorting Hat called your name, to share meals and laughter with those who became your family. Above the tables floated thousands of candles, drifting gently in the air, their flames never falling, their light soft and steady. At the far end of the hall stood the staff table, where professors watched over their students, where announcements were made, where the headmaster or headmistress guided the rhythm of school life. Meals in the Great Hall were feasts of enchantment. Food appeared as if by magic, steaming and plentiful, carried up from the kitchens by house elves who worked tirelessly. Roasts, pies, puddings, fruits and breads covered the tables, drinks filled goblets without spilling. Desserts appeared at the perfect moment. Helga Hufflepuff had designed the system herself, ensuring that no child would ever go hungry, that the comfort of food would always remind them that Hogwarts was a home as well as a school, even in times of hardship when the world outside suffered famine or war. The Great Hall remained abundant, its feasts a promise of safety and care. Beyond meals, the hall hosted ceremonies that became the soul of tradition. The sorting each autumn filled the room with anticipation, the sorting hat placed upon the heads of new students, its voice whispering choices, its final cry met with cheers from house tables. The welcoming feast introduced them to the community, and the final feast in summer marked the end of the year, students laughing and weeping as they prepared to return home. Between these bookends came countless moments that formed memory, from birthdays celebrated in secret to banners hung in victory. One of the most enduring traditions tied to the Great Hall was the house points system. From the earliest centuries, points were awarded for achievement, for bravery, for loyalty, for cleverness, for good deeds, and taken away for mischief, for disobedience, for failure to follow rules. Colored hourglasses, filled with gems, stood near the hall, each stone glowing as points were gained or lost. Students watched them eagerly, their pride swelling when their house filled with rubies or sapphires or emeralds or topaz, their frustration burning when points slipped away. At the end of the year, the winning house was honored, its banner draping the hall. Its members cheered as victors. This system fostered rivalry, sometimes sharp, yet it also bound students to their houses, teaching them that their actions mattered not only for themselves but for the community they represented. As centuries passed, Quidditch too became a tradition tied to the hall. Students gathered to hear announcements of matches, teams marched in for celebration feasts, victories were toasted with cheers, and losses softened by comfort from friends. Quidditch had grown from broom races into a sport of skill and strategy, and its importance to students rivaled even their lessons. The Great Hall became the place where victories were shared, where rivalries were deepened, where the spirit of play turned into the spirit of family. The hall was also the stage for special moments. On Halloween, it filled with carved pumpkins, bats fluttered through the air, and feasts of autumn delights covered the tables. On Christmas, it shone with towering trees hung with baubles and icicles, snow drifting gently from the ceiling without melting on the ground, warmth filling every corner. On the last night of term, it glowed with summer light, students singing and laughing as they looked toward home. These seasonal celebrations gave rhythm to the year, marking the passage of time, reminding all that Hogwarts was more than lessons. It was life itself. The Great Hall also carried a deeper purpose. It was where unity was forged. Though students sat at separate tables, though houses competed fiercely, the hall gathered them together every day, reminding them they were part of the same school. Here the Sorting Hat sang of unity. Here the headmaster spoke of courage and caution. Here ghosts mingled with the living. Here laughter rose louder than division. In its space beneath the enchanted ceiling, the identity of Hogwarts was renewed again and again. Many stories began in the Great Hall. Friendships formed over shared meals. Rivalries sparked with words shouted across tables. Romances began in glances caught beneath candlelight. Announcements of triumphs, of dangers, of losses echoed from its walls, shaping the lives of generations. The hall was witness to everything, carrying memory in its stones, holding laughter and sorrow alike. To walk into the Great Hall was to step into the soul of Hogwarts, to feel centuries of tradition pressing close, to know you were part of something that stretched far beyond yourself. It was the balance to the forest, the warmth to the wildness, the order to the chaos. And as the centuries passed, as new generations arrived and old ones departed, the Great Hall remained constant, a place of belonging for all who entered. And while feasts and celebrations defined life within, beyond the walls, Hogwarts continued to shape the wider wizarding world. Its graduates carried their lessons into politics, into magic, into the formation of laws and traditions that reached far beyond the castle. The next chapter belongs to this influence, to the way Hogwarts graduates spread into society, carrying the school's spirit into every corner of wizarding Britain. By the time Hogwarts had stood for several centuries, it was no longer only a school, it was the center of magical culture in Britain, its influence stretching into every corner of wizarding life. Children who had once grown up isolated in their villages now shared years of learning, years of rivalry, years of friendship, and when they left the castle, they carried that bond with them. They carried their knowledge too. Knowledge organized, disciplined, passed down with structure rather than scattered fragments. Slowly the wizarding world began to change, not through decree or law, but through the quiet rhythm of generations shaped by Hogwarts. Graduates became healers, inventors, ministers, and teachers. They carried spells learned in the library into their communities, improving lives in ways both grand and small. A charm taught by Helga's successors made food last longer and saved entire villages from hunger. A defensive spell passed from Gryffindor's dueling lessons protected families from raids. Ravenclaw's careful transfigurations found their way into daily life, helping craftsmen, scholars, and explorers. Even Slytherin's sharp lessons in strategy produced leaders who built alliances, negotiated peace, and yes, sometimes sought power with darker intent. Whatever their path, each carried the mark of the castle, each carried the imprint of a house, each carried the weight of a tradition older than any family name. Wizarding governance, too, began to bend toward Hogwarts. Councils formed, gatherings of witches and wizards who sought to create order, and often those councils were filled with Hogwarts alumni. Shared memories of the Great Hall, of the Sorting Hat, of professors who had shaped them, gave these leaders common ground. Even when they came from rival houses, even when they argued fiercely, they could not escape the bond that had been forged in their youth. Slowly the wizarding world became less about scattered clans and more about a shared culture, and at its center stood the castle by the Scottish Loch. The Ministry of Magic, as it later became known, was not yet formed, but the seeds were planted in these centuries. Hogwarts graduates established the Wizengamot, an early council of law where disputes were judged, Crimes punished, agreements sealed. The robes and rituals of this body bore the influence of Hogwarts, its halls echoing the structure of house debates, its judgments shaped by the values of courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition. The wizarding world was beginning to govern itself, and the education of Hogwarts lay behind it. The influence extended into trade as well. Wizards needed wands, cauldrons, parchment, quills, books, and potions, and Hogwarts created demand on a scale never seen before. Wand makers honed their craft, potion masters perfected recipes, bookbinders filled shelves with spell books. Communities sprang up to serve these needs. Families made their livelihoods supplying the students and graduates of the castle. Centuries later, Diagon Alley would flourish. But even in these early days, the marketplace of wizarding Britain was shaped by Hogwarts' hunger for supplies. Culturally too, the castle left its mark. Songs sung in the Great Hall spread into wizarding homes. Ghost stories whispered in dormitories were carried back to villages. Quidditch, born in the courtyards, became a game played across Britain. Families who had never set foot in the castle knew of its houses, spoke proudly of which one their children belonged to, carried the rivalries into their own gatherings. Gryffindor, courage; Ravenclaw, wit; Hufflepuff, loyalty; Slytherin, ambition. These became more than school values. They became the pillars of wizarding identity. Even the divisions of Hogwarts shaped the wider world. Gryffindors often sought positions of defense and leadership, standing as aurors or protectors. Ravenclaws filled roles of scholarship, creating spells, maps, and inventions that pushed magic forward. Hufflepuffs became the backbone of the community. Healers, farmers, craftsmen, steady and dependable. Slytherins rose to positions of power, sometimes feared, sometimes admired, often controversial but always influential. Outside the castle, these divisions sometimes hardened into prejudice, yet they also created balance, a society where different strengths could be recognized, even if not always celebrated equally. The school's reputation reached beyond Britain. Travelers spoke of the enchanted castle in the north, of the sorting hat that sang, of the library filled with endless shelves, of the ghosts who guided the living. Other magical schools existed in Europe and beyond, but Hogwarts was soon seen as one of the greatest. Families who could send their children did so eagerly, and those who could not still looked upon the castle with admiration or envy. Its fame became legend, its name synonymous with magic itself. Through times of peace and times of strife, Hogwarts remained constant. Plagues swept through villages, wars broke out between kings, yet the castle endured, its doors opening each year to children of 11, its feasts bright with candlelight, its sorting hat singing anew. Wizards began to trust in its permanence. To them, Hogwarts was not only a place of learning, but a guarantee that their culture would survive, that no matter what the Muggle world brought, their own world had a foundation that could not be shaken. And yet, as the wizarding world grew more connected, as councils and markets and traditions took form, the question of secrecy became more pressing. Muggles were watching, suspicious, fearful, angry. Rumors spread of witches who flew at night, of curses that struck villages, of creatures seen at the edges of fields. Tensions rose, fires burned, and wizards could no longer live openly among their neighbors. It was in this age that the International Statute of Secrecy would eventually be born, a law that would change everything. A law that would seal the wizarding world apart from the Muggle world once and for all. And when that moment came, Hogwarts would be at the heart of it, its wards strengthened, its traditions adapted, its students shielded more fiercely than ever before. But before that decree was written, before the law was sealed, the school lived through centuries of renaissance and discovery, of invention and exploration, of knowledge growing as fast as the world outside. The next chapter belongs to that time, when Hogwarts stood not in fear but in curiosity, when it absorbed the light of the wider world and reflected it in its own enchanted halls. The centuries that followed the Middle Ages brought change not only to Muggles but to wizards as well. The Renaissance was a time of exploration, of invention, of new ways of thinking about the world. While Muggles charted seas, studied the heavens with telescopes, painted masterpieces, and questioned old traditions, the wizarding world too felt the shift. Hogwarts, standing steady in the highlands of Scotland, did not close itself away from this new age. Instead, it absorbed its energy, its curiosity, its hunger for knowledge, and reflected it in its own enchanted halls. The library grew faster in these centuries than in any other before. Volumes from the continent were brought back by traveling scholars, books of alchemy, written in careful Latin script, treatises on astronomy, compendiums of magical creatures. Ravenclaw Tower in particular glowed with lamps burning late into the night as students pored over new discoveries, comparing them with what wizards had always known. The lines between Muggle and magical learning blurred in places. Star charts used by astronomers in Italy were checked against the knowledge of centaurs in the Forbidden Forest. Muggle compasses and maps were studied beside spells, direction, and navigation. Hogwarts in this age was alive with debate, with questioning, with the sense that the world was larger than any one book could contain. Subjects at the school expanded too. Alchemy became a formal branch of study, its golden promise of transformation capturing the imagination of students. Astronomy deepened, no longer just the charting of planets, but the seeking of patterns, the asking of whether the stars themselves held magic. Arithmancy, the study of numbers and their connection to spells, rose in importance, blending mathematical precision with enchantment. The curriculum stretched, the professors demanded more, and students left the castle not only as spellcasters, but as thinkers shaped by a world opening before them. This era also brought new tools and practices into wizarding life. Broomsticks, once crude and unreliable, were refined. Craftsmen experimented with bristle types, with wood selection, with balance. And by the end of the 15th century, flight was smoother, faster, safer. What began as reckless races above the grounds began to shape into recognizable games. Teams formed, rules were whispered, balls enchanted. Quidditch had not yet reached its final form, but it was in these Renaissance centuries that it grew from pastime into passion. The skies above Hogwarts filled with laughter and daring, and the tradition that would one day define school rivalries was born. Art and enchantment also blended in new ways. Students experimented with portraits that not only moved but captured more of the sitter's personality, portraits that could debate, advise, and joke. Tapestries were woven with threads charmed to shimmer, as if alive, showing stories that shifted and grew as centuries passed. Even music took on magical qualities, with instruments enchanted to play themselves, choirs of portraits joining in harmony, the great hall resounding with voices both living and painted. The Renaissance spirit of creativity seeped into every stone of Hogwarts, leaving behind works of beauty that endured long after their creators were gone. The school itself became more open to exchange with the wider magical world. Traveling professors visited from Europe, bringing spells and theories unknown in Britain. Hogwarts students in turn traveled abroad after graduation, spreading its name, carrying its traditions, blending what they had learned with what they found elsewhere. Slowly, Hogwarts became not just a British school, but a beacon of learning across wizarding Europe. Its graduates were respected, its library envied, its towers spoken of in distant lands. Yet this age was not without its shadows. The curiosity of the Renaissance encouraged exploration of dangerous magics too. Dark wizards experimented with new curses, blending old traditions with new ideas, creating spells of cruelty more complex than before. The restricted section grew heavier with volumes bound in chains, their words locked away for fear they would corrupt young minds. Debates raged among professors over whether knowledge should ever be forbidden. Ravenclaw's legacy urged that all knowledge had value, yet Hufflepuff's spirit reminded them that safety and kindness must come first. The compromise remained: dangerous works preserved but sealed, their pages whispering temptations only to those reckless enough to seek them. For the students, life during this era carried both wonder and intensity. Lessons grew harder, expectations higher, rivalries sharper, but so too did opportunities. A boy from Gryffindor invented a spell that allowed ink to resist smudging, a small charm that spread quickly into common use. A girl from Hufflepuff created a potion that eased fevers, saving hundreds in her village during a plague. A Ravenclaw student mapped stars with such precision that his charts were used for centuries. A Slytherin devised defensive wards that were later adopted by the Wizengamot. These were not isolated feats, but signs that Hogwarts was producing minds prepared to shape the wizarding world. The Renaissance was also an age of questioning authority, and Hogwarts felt this within its walls. Students challenged professors more openly, argued over theories, sought to test limits. Some of these challenges led to progress, others to punishment. The Sorting Hat itself, in its songs, began to speak of change, urging students to adapt, to remember unity, to beware pride. Its voice reminded all that though discovery was important, wisdom mattered most. The knowledge without restraint could burn as quickly as it could build. And yet through all this, Hogwarts thrived. The Great Hall glowed with candlelight. Feasts celebrated the seasons. Ghosts wandered and whispered. Portraits argued and laughed. Outside, kingdoms fought. Maps were redrawn. Ships crossed oceans. But inside the castle, life continued with its steady rhythm of lessons, houses, and traditions. The Renaissance left its mark on Hogwarts, yes, but the school remained what it had always been, a sanctuary for magical children, a home where courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition were nurtured. Still, the world was changing, and with change came danger. Muggles grew sharper in their observations, more suspicious of what they did not understand. Witch hunts flared again, fiercer than before, pressing wizarding communities into secrecy. By the end of the Renaissance, the question was no longer whether wizards should hide, but how. The time of open blending between magical and non-magical learning was drawing to a close. A great divide was coming, a law that would separate worlds, a statute that would bind wizards to secrecy forever. Hogwarts, strong and steady, prepared itself for this new reality. Its wards strengthened, its lessons adapted, its role shifting. The age of openness was ending, and the age of secrecy was about to begin. By the end of the Renaissance, the wizarding world was no longer able to live in the open shadows of Muggle society. Curiosity had grown sharper, suspicion harsher, and with each new century the danger increased. Witch hunts raged across Europe, fires burned in village squares, and the line between rumor and reality blurred. Wizards and witches who once walked carefully among Muggles now found themselves hunted more fiercely than ever. It was in this climate that the International Statute of Secrecy was born, a law that would separate the magical world from the non-magical forever. Hogwarts, already cloaked in layers of protection, became one of the strongest symbols of this age, a fortress of secrecy standing firm while the world beyond turned hostile. The decision to hide was not made lightly. Some argued that wizards should fight, that they should stand proudly and claim their place. Others believed survival required silence, that too many lives had already been lost to persecution. Councils met, disputes flared, but the conclusion was clear. Magic would no longer be shown openly. Enchantments would be woven across towns and villages. Magical creatures would be hidden away, records of their existence concealed, and wizarding communities would retreat into secrecy. The Statute of Secrecy, passed in 1692, became the law that shaped all magical life from that century onward. For Hogwarts, secrecy was already second nature. From its founding, it had been hidden, its castle appearing as a ruin to muggles who stumbled too close, its grounds protected by spells that turned wanderers away. Yet the statute brought even greater caution. Wards were strengthened, enchantments renewed, charms layered over the lock, the forest, the very stones. The castle became not only a school, but a fortress of concealment, its survival proof of the strength of secrecy. Within the castle, lessons too reflected this new reality. Defense against the dark arts grew more central, for secrecy demanded skill in protection. Students were taught concealment charms, disillusionment spells, enchantments to mask their magic, subtle skills that had not been emphasized before. Professors reminded them that to survive in this new world, they must be clever as well as brave, careful as well as powerful. Hogwarts prepared its students not only to wield magic, but to hide it, to live lives in two worlds without ever revealing the truth of who they were. The statute also deepened the divide between wizards and muggles, and that divide echoed within the castle walls. Students of Muggle-born heritage sometimes felt caught between two worlds, their home families unable to know the truth of their lives, their friends within Hogwarts warning them of danger outside. Pure-blood families carried pride in the law, believing it proved the superiority of wizards, while others grieved the loss of connection. The Sorting Hat sang each year of unity, of the danger of division, but whispers of bloodlines and secrecy grew sharper. Hogwarts mirrored the wider world, a place of refuge but also a place where tensions simmered. Yet secrecy also gave Hogwarts freedom. With the Muggle world pushed away, the school could flourish without interference. Its grounds expanded, new classrooms were built, new enchantments added, subjects grew richer, professors more daring in their teaching, for they no longer feared discovery. Magical creatures once hunted in the outside world found shelter in the Forbidden Forest and the Black Lake, their presence protected by the school's concealment. Students grew up in an environment where magic was not only safe, but celebrated, a stark contrast to the fear of their ancestors. The Great Hall became the stage for this new age, its feasts reminding students that they were part of a hidden world bound by tradition, its Sorting Hat singing of unity in secrecy. The ghosts spoke of the past, of times when they had faced fire and persecution, and the living listened, grateful that such days were gone. Even if at the cost of retreat, Quidditch too grew more important, for sport gave joy and identity in a world that had grown cautious. Rivalries sharpened, matches filled the skies, house pride blazed, all within the safety of secrecy. But secrecy also brought shadows. Dark wizards took advantage of it, building their power in hidden places, unchecked by Muggle eyes. Some used the very concealment of the statute to spread cruelty, knowing they would not be seen. Hogwarts, though a place of safety, was not immune to this influence. Students whispered of families who practiced the dark arts in secret, of curses learned not from books but from heritage. Professors tried to root out these dangers, but secrecy cut both ways, protecting the innocent while also shielding the guilty. Through these centuries, Hogwarts endured as the anchor of wizarding life. Generations passed through its doors, each carrying the memory of safety, of belonging, of community hidden from the outside world. The castle itself seemed to settle more deeply into secrecy, its magic humming with protection, its towers watchful, its portraits alert. To step into Hogwarts was to step into a world apart, a world untouched by Muggle suspicion, a world where magic could thrive behind enchanted doors. The age of secrecy shaped Hogwarts in ways still felt today. It taught the school to protect itself fiercely, to value discretion as much as courage, to prepare its students not only for battle but for concealment. It deepened divisions, yet it also preserved the wizarding world through centuries of danger. Without secrecy, perhaps the fires of persecution would have consumed them all. With it, the school lived on, its candles still burning, its lessons still sung. And as secrecy became law, Hogwarts also turned inward, focusing not only on defense, but on heritage, on tradition, on the way its houses shaped identity. The next chapter belongs to the 18th and 19th centuries, when headmasters rose and fell, when new inventions and rebellions stirred within the castle, and when Hogwarts, though hidden, continued to grow and adapt to a changing world. The passing of the 17th century carried Hogwarts into new ages, centuries shaped less by plague and persecution, and more by invention, expansion, and the quiet but steady growth of magical society. The 18th and 19th centuries were long years full of change, yet through them all Hogwarts remained steady, its towers rising above the loch, its halls filled with children each autumn. The world outside shifted. Muggles built machines, sailed seas, discovered electricity and steam, yet inside the castle life carried the rhythm of spells, quills, feasts, and the Sorting Hat's yearly song. Still, these centuries brought their own stories, of headmasters who shaped generations, of student rebellions that rattled the corridors, of magical inventions that sprang from young minds eager to test their power. The 18th century was a time of consolidation for the wizarding world. With the statute of secrecy firmly in place, wizards lived more quietly, apart from muggles, building their own communities in hidden towns and alleys. Hogwarts reflected this quiet, its protection stronger than ever, its traditions firmly rooted. The library grew with new volumes, portraits multiplied across its walls. Ghosts continued to tell their stories. Yet even in this time of caution, sparks of mischief and brilliance lit the castle. Students created charms to change the colors of their robes at will, enchanted quills to write essays without effort, brewed potions that caused laughter to erupt uncontrollably. Discipline was constant, but Hogwarts always carried both order and rebellion, both strictness and play. Some headmasters of these centuries became legends in their own right. Phineas Nigellus Black, headmaster in the late 19th century, was perhaps the most controversial, sharp, clever, and deeply proud of his pure blood heritage. He ruled the school with sternness and wit, often disliked by students, yet respected for his intellect. His portrait still hangs in the headmaster's office, his voice quick to criticize but also quick to advise. Earlier headmasters had different marks, some remembered for kindness, others for eccentricity. Each left their portrait behind, adding to the chorus of voices that guided their successors. The 18th century also saw the formal establishment of subjects that had once been informal. Care of magical creatures became a recognized course, taught not just at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, but also in fields and paddocks created for safer beasts. Divination, long practiced by centaurs and seers, was added too, though debated fiercely by scholars who doubted its reliability. Hogwarts adapted to the needs of its age, broadening its curriculum, preparing its students for a magical society that was growing more complex. The 19th century carried different energy for Muggle progress, with machines and science pressed upon the hidden world of wizards. Though separated by secrecy, the wizarding world could not help but notice railways, factories, telegraphs. Students arriving at Hogwarts sometimes spoke of these things, their Muggle families whispering of change. Professors reminded them that magic had its own path, yet curiosity burned. Wizards experimented with blending magical and mechanical, with varying success. Some enchanted trains to move without tracks. Others attempted to bind spells to gears. But most of these experiments failed, leaving smoke and sparks behind. Still, the very attempts showed that Hogwarts students felt the pull of a changing world. Within the castle, student rebellions flared from time to time. Groups protested strict rules, enchanted staircases to lead professors astray, bewitched suits of armor to sing rude songs during lessons. One famous rebellion in the early 19th century involved a group of Gryffindors and Ravenclaws who enchanted the Great Hall ceiling to rain sugar quills for an entire week, refusing to remove the spell until the professors agreed to reduce homework. Though punished, their legend lived on, told with laughter in dormitories for decades. Such acts of defiance reminded all that Hogwarts was not only a place of discipline, but also of youthful energy, a place where tradition and mischief walked side by side. Magical inventions also blossomed in these centuries. Bowman Wright, a Ravenclaw, perfected the golden snitch in the late 15th century. But it was in the 18th and 19th centuries that Quidditch truly became central to Hogwarts life. Matches filled the skies. Teams wore uniforms enchanted to gleam in house colors. Crowds cheered so loudly that even the ghosts joined in. The Quidditch pitch became as important as the Great Hall, its rivalries carrying as much pride as academic success. Victories were celebrated with feasts, defeats softened with laughter and comfort. Quidditch gave Hogwarts students not only sport but identity, a chance to embody the values of their house in daring flights and brilliant catches. The 18th and 19th centuries also saw the rise of student clubs and societies. Dueling clubs grew popular, echoing Gryffindor's love of courage and Slytherin's focus on strategy. Astronomy societies gathered at the top of towers, charting stars with enchanted telescopes. Potion clubs experimented with brews that bubbled and smoked late into the night. These groups fostered creativity, competition, and camaraderie, shaping students into adults who would carry their passions into the wider wizarding world. Beyond the castle walls, Hogwarts' influence continued. Its graduates shaped wizarding politics, strengthening the Ministry of Magic, refining laws, and defending secrecy. Some became auras, hunting dark wizards who tried to defy the statute. Others became inventors, creating charms and tools that spread across wizarding Britain. The sense of shared heritage that came from Hogwarts gave cohesion to a society otherwise scattered in secret pockets. Wherever wizards gathered, the name of the castle was spoken with respect. Yet even in these quieter centuries, Hogwarts remained a place of mystery. The Chamber of Secrets still lay hidden, its basilisk sleeping. The Forbidden Forest remained untamed, filled with creatures beyond control. Portraits whispered secrets, ghosts told stories of ages long gone, and the Sorting Hat sang of unity, warning of division. The castle was never only a school. It was a living being, holding both wonder and shadow, reminding each generation that magic was more than lessons, it was legacy. By the end of the 19th century, Hogwarts stood stronger than ever. Its traditions deeply rooted, its influence vast, its identity unshaken. Students still gathered each autumn. Ghosts still drifted through walls. The Great Hall ceiling still reflected the stars, yet beyond the gates, the world was moving swiftly. New ideas of freedom, of equality, of progress began to stir. Dark wizards rose and fell. And in the 20th century, Hogwarts would meet challenges unlike any it had faced before. The rise of Grindelwald, the arrival of Albus Dumbledore, the birth of Tom Riddle, all lay ahead. The castle was ready, but its centuries of peace were coming to an end. By the close of the 19th century, the story of Hogwarts had stretched nearly 1,000 years, and though the castle stood strong, though its feasts continued, though its Sorting Hat still sang of courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition, the living memory of the founders was gone. Their portraits had never hung in the headmaster's office. Their relics were scattered or hidden. Their voices had become legend. What remained of them was carried in the houses, in the stories told to new students, in the relics whispered about in corridors. Yet with each century, the clarity of their vision blurred, their ideals reshaped by those who came after, their legacy fading into interpretation rather than truth. Gryffindor's courage was still praised, yet it had changed. In the earliest days, Godric himself had spoken of courage as standing by friends, admitting mistakes, telling truth when it was hardest. By the 19th century, many Gryffindors thought first of duels, of boldness, of daring for the sake of glory. Bravery was still alive, but it was louder, sharper, more dramatic. The quieter forms of courage, the patient loyalty to what was right, were often overlooked. Gryffindor House carried the lion, but sometimes the roar was remembered more than the heart. Ravenclaw's wisdom too shifted. Rowena had prized curiosity, the humility to admit that learning never ended, the joy of questions as much as answers. Her daughter's ghost still drifted through the tower, a silent reminder of pride and loss. But students did not always heed the lesson. By the 19th century, many Ravenclaws saw learning as competition, as achievement, as triumph of intellect over others. Knowledge became something to display, not just something to seek. The diadem was gone, yet in its absence, students imagined it as a crown of superiority, forgetting that Rowena had created it to enhance thought, not to feed pride. Hufflepuff's legacy of loyalty and fairness endured, yet it too took on new colors. Helga had welcomed all, insisting that every child deserved a chance. Her house had become the most inclusive, the most steady, the most dependable. By the centuries that followed, some outside the house began to dismiss Hufflepuffs as ordinary, as unremarkable, forgetting that true loyalty required immense strength. They saw the Badger as humble to the point of weakness, not realizing that Helga had chosen it for its quiet ferocity. Within the house, the spirit of fairness lived on, yet beyond it, others misinterpreted her legacy, turning her greatest strength into something underestimated. Slytherin's influence perhaps changed most of all. Salazar had been stern, ambitious, convinced of the need for pure blood heritage. His locket carried his pride, his chamber of secrets, his suspicion, but over centuries his ideals hardened into prejudice, his name tied to arrogance and cruelty. Ambition was no longer taught as striving to achieve, as reaching higher, as cunning used for survival. It became associated with selfishness, with domination, with darkness. Not all Slytherins followed this path, yet the reputation stuck. The serpent became feared, the house distrusted, the legacy of ambition twisted into shadow. The Sorting Hat still sang of the founders each year, reminding students of their ideals, warning against division. Yet even the hat carried the weight of centuries. Its voice grew weary at times, speaking less of unity and more of rivalry, reflecting the reality of the school. The founders' quarrels had been about vision and values, but the rivalries of students often became about pride, about winning the house cup, about scoring points. What had begun as philosophy had become competition. What had begun as wisdom had become tradition. What had begun as unity had become rivalry. The relics too slipped into myth. The sword of Gryffindor was still whispered about, but most students never saw it, and its enchantments remained a tale rather than a reality. The diadem of Ravenclaw was long gone, lost with Helene, its memory fading into legend. The cup of Hufflepuff passed through families, its powers little remembered, its story softened. The locket of Slytherin remained a mark of his bloodline, but its history was clouded, its enchantments forgotten by most. To students of the 19th century, The relics were not real objects but symbols, stories told in the common rooms, memories of a past too distant to feel alive, and so the legacy of the founders faded. Not entirely lost, but reshaped by centuries of repetition, misinterpretation, and rivalry. Their true voices were gone, their intentions forgotten by most, their names remembered more in banners and songs than in philosophy, yet their influence lingered still. Every sorting, every house cheer, every point given or taken, every rivalry on the Quidditch pitch echoed the choices they had made 1,000 years earlier. By the turn of the 20th century, Hogwarts stood as strong as ever, yet it was no longer the dream of 4 united visionaries. It was an institution, shaped by headmasters and headmistresses, by professors and prefects, by generations of students who gave it new meaning with every passing year. The founders' ideals had not vanished, but they were filtered through time, adapted to need, distorted by rivalry, softened by memory. The castle lived, but its creators were ghosts of legend, their true intentions known only to the Sorting Hat and perhaps to the stones themselves. And as the 20th century dawned, new stories began to take shape. Wizards rose to power beyond the castle, wars loomed, dark magic stirred again. Hogwarts would become the stage for these struggles, producing both heroes and villains, both defenders and destroyers. Before the arrival of Dumbledore, before the rise of Tom Riddle, the castle lived through years of quiet and of change, years when new headmasters guided it, when new traditions were added, when the wizarding world beyond shaped the rhythm within. The next chapter belongs to this era, to the 20th century before Dumbledore, when Hogwarts prepared unknowingly for the storm that would one day come, when its halls were filled with laughter and rivalry, but also with the first whispers of shadows gathering. The 20th century brought with it a new pace, a new rhythm that touched even the hidden world of wizards. Muggles built machines that flew through the sky, trains that crossed nations in hours, radios that carried voices through the air. Though wizards remained apart under the Statute of Secrecy, they could not help but notice the changes in the world around them, and in their own way they too began to shift. Hogwarts, standing as it had for nearly 1,000 years, welcomed generation after generation of students, its towers unchanged, its traditions steady, yet its story during these years carried currents of both quiet and shadow. At the dawn of the century, the castle was led by headmasters and headmistresses whose names are remembered in portraits, their influence lingering in the corridors. Some were stern, emphasizing discipline in a world where secrecy was paramount. Others were kind, seeking to soften rivalries and nurture children through times of uncertainty. They guided the school through decades when the wizarding world debated its future, when whispers of reform mixed with fears of exposure. The ghosts watched, the Sorting Hat sang, the Great Hall filled with feasts. Yet beneath the routine, tensions slowly gathered. Students of this age lived lives familiar to those who came before. They studied charms, transfiguration, potions, astronomy. They whispered about the restricted section, laughed in dormitories, cheered at Quidditch matches. Rivalries between Gryffindor and Slytherin sharpened as always. Ravenclaws buried themselves in books. Hufflepuff steadied the balance. The pattern of life seemed timeless, yet each generation brought new personalities, new sparks of brilliance or mischief. Some students became healers, others auras, others inventors of small spells that found their way into everyday wizarding life. Their names may not be remembered in legend, but their presence kept Hogwarts alive, century after century. Yet the 20th century outside the castle was one of turmoil, and the wizarding world was not untouched. The rise of dark wizards began to trouble Britain. Some sought to exploit secrecy, to build power in hidden corners. Others whispered of bloodlines, of purity, of ideas long tied to Salazar's Slytherin. These movements grew slowly at first, more rumor than reality. Yet the Sorting Hat sensed the danger. In its yearly songs, it began to warn of division more urgently, urging unity among houses, reminding all that Hogwarts must stand together or risk being torn apart. Few listened closely, for to students the warning seemed distant, more tradition than prophecy. Yet the hat had always seemed deeper, and its songs of this age carried unease. One of the most important changes during these decades was the growth of the Ministry of Magic as a true governing power. Many of its leaders were Hogwarts graduates, their choices shaped by the houses they once called home. Policies toward magical creatures, toward secrecy, toward international cooperation were debated in halls of power, but the roots of those debates lay in dormitory arguments, in classroom discussions, in rivalries born at Hogwarts. The castle was not only a school, it was a seedbed for the entire direction of wizarding Britain. The world wars of the Muggles also touched wizards, though hidden behind secrecy. Some witches and wizards fought quietly, defending magical communities from chaos. Others tried to use the wars to their advantage. Hogwarts itself remained untouched by bombs or battles, its enchantments too strong, its location too remote. Yet students arriving at the castle carried with them stories of families caught in turmoil, of fear outside the magical world. The ghosts spoke comfort, the professors gave discipline, the great hall burned with steady candlelight, but the outside world pressed close, a reminder that secrecy could not keep danger forever away. It was in these decades, too, that names later remembered in legend first entered the castle. Marvolo Riddle arrived in the 1930s, a boy who would become Lord Voldemort, sorted into Slytherin, brilliant, ambitious, dangerous. Even as a student, he sought secrets others had forgotten, charmed professors with his intelligence, and gathered followers among his peers. Few knew then the shadow he would cast, but whispers already spread of his coldness, his power, his hunger for knowledge beyond what was allowed. The Chamber of Secrets, long-thought myth, stirred again under his hand, though its story would not be revealed until years later. At the same time, other students of light and promise filled the castle. Children who would become aurors, healers, inventors, teachers. Some of them faced Riddle in his youth. Others admired him, others ignored him, but all were shaped by the same castle, the same Sorting Hat, the same enchanted halls. Hogwarts, in the early 20th century, was thus a place of contrasts, producing both those who would protect the world and those who would try to destroy it. The castle itself continued to adapt. Subjects grew more specialized, professors brought new methods, magical inventions influenced lessons, the Quidditch pitch was improved, the game refined into the sport we know today. Clubs multiplied, dueling became formal again, music filled the halls with enchanted choirs. Yet, beneath the joy and rivalry lay the weight of history. Students might not have known it, but they were preparing for an age of conflict that would reach far beyond their childhoods. By the mid-20th century, Hogwarts stood as it always had, strong and proud, its great hall shining, its Sorting Hat singing, its ghosts wandering, its forest whispering. Yet change was near. A new professor was coming, one whose brilliance and compassion would transform the castle, one who would rise to become headmaster, one who would guide the school through wars and shadows alike. Albus Dumbledore, once a student of Ravenclaw Tower's rival Gryffindor house, returned as a teacher, and the story of Hogwarts entered a new chapter, one of brilliance, one of sorrow, one of destiny. The arrival of Albus Dumbledore at Hogwarts as a professor marked the beginning of a new era. Though the castle had stood for centuries, though countless headmasters and headmistresses had guided its course, none would shape it so profoundly as he. In his youth, Dumbledore had already gained a reputation as a prodigy, his brilliance in charms and transfiguration unmatched, his mind restless with curiosity, his heart tested by tragedy. When he returned to the castle not as a student but as a teacher, the atmosphere of Hogwarts began to change. A new energy filled its halls, one of warmth and vision, of compassion balanced by wisdom, of greatness not yet fully revealed but already felt by those around him. As Professor of Transfiguration, Dumbledore brought lessons alive in ways that dazzled students. He transformed objects not merely with precision, but with creativity, turning needles into birds that sang, chairs into creatures that danced, ink into light that floated across the classroom. His teaching was not only about technique, but about imagination, about seeing beyond what was and into what could be. Students who struggled found him patient, students who excelled found him challenging, and all felt inspired. His classes became legend, spoken of with excitement, remembered for years after graduation. But beyond his brilliance in magic, it was his kindness that made the deepest mark. Dumbledore knew each student, not only their names, but their hopes, their fears, their struggles. He listened when they faltered, encouraged when they doubted, comforted when they grieved. In a castle that could sometimes feel cold, in a world where secrecy pressed heavily, his presence was a light. Even those who feared his sharp intelligence found themselves warmed by his compassion. Professors respected him, ghosts admired him, and portraits whispered that this young wizard would one day guide the entire school. The world beyond Hogwarts was already stirring with shadows. Grindelwald, once Dumbledore's friend and later his greatest regret, rose in Europe, spreading fear with visions of domination. Though Hogwarts itself remained untouched, the fear of war crept into its corridors. Students whispered about battles abroad, about families caught in danger, about dark ideas spreading across borders. Dumbledore, still young, carried the weight of his past with Grindelwald quietly, never speaking of it, yet it shaped his resolve. He became not only a teacher of spells, but a guardian of values, reminding students that power must serve love, that greatness meant nothing without kindness. During these years, Tom Riddle was also a student. His brilliance dark and cold, his ambition sharp. Professors praised him, students admired him, yet Dumbledore watched with wary eye. He saw in Riddle the charm that masked cruelty, the intelligence that bent toward control, the hunger that sought not knowledge but dominance. While others were dazzled, Dumbledore noticed the shadow. He questioned him, spoke with him, studied him, and though he never fully uncovered the truth of Riddle's secrets, he knew the boy carried danger. It was Dumbledore who suspected the opening of the Chamber of Secrets. Dumbledore who feared what lay in Slytherin's air. Dumbledore who began preparing quietly for a storm only he seemed to see. In time, Dumbledore rose to become headmaster, his office high in the tower filled with enchanted instruments, with portraits of past leaders, with the sorting hat and the sword of Gryffindor resting close. As headmaster, he carried the school with both authority and gentleness, balancing discipline with forgiveness, tradition with change. He expanded the curriculum, encouraged creativity, welcomed students of all backgrounds with fairness that echoed Helga Hufflepuff herself. His leadership gave Hogwarts a spirit of hope, even when the outside world darkened. Dumbledore also deepened the bond between Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic. He spoke in councils, advised ministers, resisted policies that threatened fairness. Though many respected him, some feared him, for his power was unmatched, his mind sharp, his influence vast, yet he never sought power for its own sake. His heart was with the children of the castle, his focus on protecting them, his joy in seeing them grow. The ghosts too respected him. drifting into his office to offer counsel. The portraits of past headmasters argued and advised, yet Dumbledore listened with patience, choosing his own path. The Sorting Hat sang of him, hinting that Hogwarts had found a leader whose spirit embodied all four founders: courageous as Gryffindor, wise as Ravenclaw, loyal as Hufflepuff, ambitious in his vision like Slytherin. Under his guidance, the school thrived, its feasts brighter, its lessons deeper, its spirit stronger. But shadows grew still. Grindelwald's war shook Europe, and though Dumbledore eventually defeated him in a duel that became legend, the scars remained. Hogwarts felt the tremors of fear. Students whispered in dormitories, professors tightened discipline, parents sent letters full of worry. Even as the war ended, another shadow was already forming. Darker, closer, rooted not abroad, but within the very walls that had once sheltered a boy named Riddle. Thus Dumbledore's era began, an age of brilliance and warmth, of innovation and compassion, yet also an age of vigilance, of quiet preparation, of watching for dangers that others could not see. He became the greatest headmaster Hogwarts had ever known, yet his time was marked not only by triumph but by sorrow, for under his watch both heroes and villains would rise, and the fate of the wizarding world would again be decided within the walls of the castle. Even as Dumbledore's era of leadership filled Hogwarts with light, another story unfolded in shadow. Tom Marvolo Riddle had walked its corridors as a boy, charming his professors, impressing his classmates, hiding the darkness that already grew within him. He was sorted into Slytherin, the house of Salazar himself, and from the moment he arrived, he sought knowledge others feared to touch. To most he brilliant, handsome, courteous. To Dumbledore he appeared dangerous, a boy who wore masks too easily, who asked questions that reached too deeply into forbidden places. It was Riddle who uncovered the truth of the Chamber of Secrets, the hidden vault that Salazar Slytherin had carved into the foundation of the castle centuries before. Where others dismissed the legend as myth, he sought it with determination, tracing whispers in the library, following clues through the walls, listening to the hissing of pipes. As a Parselmouth he could speak the language of serpents, and with this gift the secret door opened for him. Within the vast chamber he found the basilisk, a creature of terror that had slept for centuries. Where most would have recoiled, he saw not horror but power, a weapon waiting to obey his command. The year he opened the chamber, the castle shook with fear. Students whispered of voices in the walls, of footsteps in the night, of shadows moving where none should be. Then came the attacks. Students found stiff and cold, frozen in stone, their eyes wide with the echo of the basilisk gaze. Panic spread, professors searched endlessly. Ghosts drifted with unease, and rumors filled the great hall. The legend of Slytherin's heir was spoken aloud, whispers growing into fear that one of their own was carrying out the old founder's will. The school stood on the brink of closure. Parents sent anxious letters, the ministry pressed for answers, and within the castle suspicion poisoned the air. Muggle-born students in particular lived in terror, knowing they were the ones the legend spoke against. Rivalries between houses sharpened, friendships strained, trust dissolved. Hogwarts, once a sanctuary, felt like a place of danger. In the midst of this chaos, one student died. Myrtle, a young girl whose restless spirit would rise as the ghost later known as Moaning Myrtle. She had wandered into the path of the basilisk and was struck down, her death echoing through the corridors. Her haunting wails would fill the girl's bathroom for decades to come, a sorrowful reminder of the day the chamber opened and claimed its first true victim. Riddle, ever clever, ensured suspicion did not fall upon him. Instead, he framed another, Hagrid, the half-giant boy who loved magical creatures and had once raised a harmless acromantula in the castle. The discovery of the creature gave the ministry its scapegoat, and Hagrid was expelled, his wand broken, his innocence unproven. Riddle received praise for his supposed bravery in revealing the culprit, his reputation untarnished, his darkness hidden once again. The chamber was sealed, the basilisk returned to slumber, and the school carried on, believing the danger ended. But Dumbledore was not fooled. Though he could not prove it, he suspected the truth. He saw Riddle's hunger for power, his manipulation of events, his lack of remorse. He knew the boy's story was too neat, too convenient, and that the expulsion of Hagrid was a tragedy born of deceit. Dumbledore's watchful eyes remained on Riddle, even as the boy left Hogwarts and stepped into the wider world. The reopening of the chamber left scars that never fully healed. Myrtle's ghost remained, her sobs echoing in lonely bathrooms, her story a warning told to generations of students. Hagrid, though later allowed to remain at the castle as gamekeeper, carried the weight of false blame all his life. The legend of the chamber did not vanish, but became part of Hogwarts lore, whispered by students late at night, dismissed by professors as myth, but always lingering in the air, waiting for the day it would stir again. For Hogwarts, this chapter marked the moment when the shadow of Voldemort first touched its walls. Tom Riddle had not yet taken that name, had not yet gathered followers, had not yet declared his war, but his ambition had already scarred the school. His cruelty had already claimed a life. His cunning had already destroyed the childhood of one boy who loved nothing more than the castle itself. The Chamber of Secrets became not only a relic of Salazar, but also a reminder of Riddle's rise, a warning that Hogwarts was not immune to darkness, that its walls could hide as much shadow as light. Dumbledore's era continued, but from that day onward, he carried the knowledge that the castle's safety could never be taken for granted. He strengthened protections, guided students with greater care, and prepared quietly for the return of the darkness he knew would come. For though Tom Riddle had left Hogwarts as a young man, the castle itself remained tied to him, its chamber still waiting, its basilisk still alive, its secrets still coiled in shadow. When Tom Riddle left Hogwarts, he did so with honors, admired by professors, respected by classmates, his reputation polished and his charm intact. To the wider wizarding world, he was a brilliant young man, destined for greatness, but to Dumbledore, and to the castle that had watched him grow, he was already something more dangerous. His years at Hogwarts had given him knowledge, skill, and secrecy. They had also given him power over the Chamber of Secrets, and the taste of control that came from unleashing fear. Though he departed, his influence lingered, like a shadow stretching back through the corridors. In the years after graduation, Riddle worked at the ministry briefly, then vanished into travels across Europe, hunting dark magic, seeking objects of significance, twisting what he had learned into something deeper and more sinister. Rumors reached Britain of curses left in villages, of artifacts stolen from ancient tombs, of spells so cruel that even seasoned wizards shuddered. Yet at Hogwarts, life seemed unchanged. Students continued their lessons, Quidditch filled the skies, the Great Hall rang with laughter and song. To the children who arrived each autumn, Tom Riddle was only a name in the records, another graduate among thousands. But to Dumbledore, watchful and wary, he was the greatest threat the castle had ever birthed. The relics of the founders, once symbols of hope, became Riddle's obsession. He sought them out, twisted them, turned them into Horcruxes, fragments of his soul bound into objects that carried both power and corruption. The locket of Slytherin, the cup of Hufflepuff, the diadem of Ravenclaw, each became poisoned by his touch, transformed from symbols of legacy into instruments of immortality. Though these artifacts were far from Hogwarts, the castle itself seemed to feel their loss, as if threads of its own history had been cut and knotted into darkness. Meanwhile, his followers began to gather, Young witches and wizards, many from Slytherin House, but not all, were drawn to his charisma, his promises of power, his vision of a purified world. They became the first Death Eaters, though at that time the name was not yet spoken. Some had studied alongside him at Hogwarts, remembering his brilliance and falling easily under his spell. Others were too young to know him, but admired the legends whispered about the gifted boy who had once walked their halls. Slowly a network formed, and though the castle itself was untouched, the seeds of war were being planted in its very memory. For students at Hogwarts in these decades, life still seemed ordinary. They learned charms, practiced dueling, cheered at Quidditch. Yet the Sorting Hat sang with greater urgency, its songs filled with warnings of unity, of danger, of division that could destroy them. Few listened, treating its verses as tradition rather than prophecy. But the Hat, like Dumbledore, sensed the storm. It knew that the shadow of Slytherin's heir had not ended with the closing of the chamber. It knew that darkness was waiting just beyond the walls. Hagrid remained at the castle during this time, working as gamekeeper, his heart still loyal despite the injustice of his expulsion. He tended to the grounds, cared for creatures, welcomed new students with his broad smile. Many never knew the truth of his story, believing only the tale that he had been reckless with a monster, but the castle itself seemed to hold him close, as if it knew he had been wrong. His presence was a reminder that Hogwarts was not only shaped by heroes and villains, but also by those caught between, by those who suffered from lies yet still chose to serve with love. As Riddle transformed into Lord Voldemort, his influence spread back toward Hogwarts in quieter ways. Rumors reached the common rooms of attacks on muggles, of dark wizards rising, of families choosing sides. Some students came to school already carrying his ideology, proud of their pure-blood heritage, whispering of Slytherin's vision. Others resisted, speaking of unity, of fairness, of Hufflepuff's kindness. The rivalries that had always defined the houses deepened, sharp words turning into prejudice, prejudice into open hostility. The Sorting Hat warned each year, but its voice was drowned out by cheers and laughter. Professors too felt the unease. Dumbledore, now headmaster, guided the school with steady hands, but even he could not prevent the tension that grew as Voldemort's name spread. Some teachers feared openly, others spoke cautiously, some denied the danger, believing the ministry would act, yet the castle seemed to feel it. Its walls groaned in storms, its portraits whispered warnings, its ghosts drifted with unease. Hogwarts, so often a sanctuary, began to feel like a fortress preparing for siege. By the late 20th century, Voldemort's power was undeniable. His followers spread terror across Britain, his ideology of blood purity infecting families, his cruelty unmatched. Hogwarts became both shield and target, a place of safety for children, but also the birthplace of his ambition. Dumbledore strengthened protections, counseled students, trained those who would one day fight. Yet even he knew that the castle itself could not remain untouched forever. The boy who had once charmed its halls had become a man determined to control or destroy them. Still, the school endured. The great hall still shone with candlelight. The forest still whispered with creatures. The ghosts still drifted. The Sorting Hat still sang. Students laughed and learned. Friendships bloomed. Rivalries sharpened. Hogwarts lived on, as it always had, as it always would, carrying both light and shadow within its walls. But war was coming, and Hogwarts would soon stand not only as a school but as a battlefield, its history colliding with its present, its stones ringing with spells, its halls echoing with both courage and fear. The next chapter belongs to that time, to the rise of Voldemort's open war, and to the way Hogwarts became once more not only a place of learning, but the heart of the struggle for the wizarding world. The First Great War of Voldemort's rise shook the wizarding world in the late 20th century, a storm that touched every family, every village, every corner of magical Britain. And though Hogwarts remained hidden behind its wards and enchantments, though its great hall still filled with candlelight and laughter, the war pressed close against its walls. Students who studied in those years carried fear in their hearts, professors carried vigilance in their eyes, and the Sorting Hat sang warnings sharper than ever before. The school endured, but it endured in the shadow of a darkness unlike any it had faced for centuries. Voldemort's ideology had already seeped into the castle long before the war turned violent. Students from families who supported him arrived at Hogwarts with pride in their bloodlines, speaking of purity, whispering of power, treating their peers with suspicion or contempt. Rivalries that had once been playful sharpened into cruelty. Gryffindor and Slytherin clashed more fiercely than ever. Insults turning into duels, friendships breaking under pressure. Some professors tried to soothe these tensions, others enforced discipline, but the castle itself seemed divided. The Sorting Hat spoke of unity, begging students to remember that they were one school, yet few truly listened. For many children, Hogwarts remained a sanctuary in those years, a place where they could laugh with friends, cheer at Quidditch, escape the fear outside. But even within the castle, the war left mark. Letters from home carried news of disappearances, of raids, of families caught between loyalty and terror. Some students left mid-year, pulled from school for safety, while others never returned after summer. Their names whispered in sorrow. The Great Hall, though still bright, carried a weight of grief in its air. Professors bore the burden quietly. Dumbledore, headmaster now revered as the greatest of his age, guided the school with steady care. His presence gave students courage. His wisdom comforted them. His very smile seemed to remind them that darkness could never fully overcome light. Yet even he could not keep fear from the halls. Other professors played their part as well. Minerva McGonagall, stern and unyielding, taught Transfiguration with precision, reminding students that discipline was strength. Phileas Flitwick, kind and encouraging, made Charms lessons bright, a spark of joy amid fear. Pomona Sprout, steady as the earth she loved, nurtured her students in the greenhouses, her warmth a balm. Each professor knew they were not only teaching spells, they were guarding spirits. The ghosts, too, became more active in this era. Nearly Headless Nick offered comfort to grieving Gryffindors. The Fat Friar cheered frightened Hufflepuffs. The Grey Lady whispered counsel to lonely Ravenclaws. And even the Bloody Baron patrolled Slytherin dungeons with unusual severity, his silver stains a silent warning of the cost of violence. The portraits carried messages between towers. The suits of armor stood taller. The very castle seemed alert, as if aware that its safety was fragile. Outside the walls, the war raged. Voldemort and his Death Eaters spread terror through Britain, killing Muggles, hunting Muggle-borns, challenging the Ministry, gathering followers. The Order of the Phoenix formed under Dumbledore's leadership, a group of witches and wizards dedicated to resisting the Dark Lord. Many of them were Hogwarts alumni, children who had once sat at the long tables, now fighting to defend the values their school had given them. The war was not only fought in forests and villages, it was fought in the memory of Hogwarts, in the lessons carried from its classrooms, in the courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition it had nurtured. Some of the Order's bravest members were young, barely out of school. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, Lily Evans, all had grown up within the castle walls, their friendships forged in dormitories and lessons. They carried Hogwarts in their hearts into the war, their laughter and loyalty a reflection of the school even in battle. Yet their story was one of tragedy too, for Voldemort's war claimed them, leaving scars that would shape the next generation. Hogwarts itself was never attacked directly during this first war. its protections too strong, its wards too ancient. Yet it was not untouched. The fear of Voldemort hung over every feast, every lesson, every sorting. Students whispered his name in fear, some refusing to speak it at all. Slytherin House, in particular, faced suspicion, for many of Voldemort's followers had come from its ranks. Not all were guilty, many were innocent, yet the shadow fell heavily upon them, deepening rivalries, breeding mistrust that would last for decades. The Chamber of Secrets, long sealed again, remained silent, yet its legend was invoked in whispers. Some said Voldemort would return to it, others that the basilisk still slept, waiting. The castle itself seemed to remember, its pipes hissing faintly in the night, its walls groaning with unease. Even though the chamber did not open again during these years, the memory of it fed the sense that Hogwarts carried secrets too deep to be ignored. The First War ended not within the castle, but in a cottage in Godric's Hollow, when Voldemort fell attempting to kill a child. Yet Hogwarts felt the echo of that moment like a bell ringing through its stones. The war was over, but its scars remain. Students returned each year with fewer names among their peers. Professors taught with weariness in their eyes, and Dumbledore carried the knowledge that the darkness was not truly gone. Voldemort had fallen, but his shadow had not lifted. And so Hogwarts entered a new chapter, one of uneasy peace. Children grew up in an age when the Dark Lord was spoken of as gone, yet the castle remembered. The Sorting Hat sang still of unity, warning still of division, its words truer than most understood. The next chapter belongs to those years of quiet, when a boy named Harry Potter would one day arrive, when the legend of Voldemort's fall would hang over the school, when Hogwarts would again become the stage where history itself was written. When Voldemort fell on that fateful night in Godric's Hollow, the wizarding world erupted in relief. For the first time in years, there was laughter in the streets, fireworks in the skies, gatherings in wizarding villages where people spoke his name without fear. They called Harry Potter the boy who lived, the child who had survived the killing curse, the symbol of hope that Voldemort had been defeated. Though Harry himself was hidden away in the Muggle world, far from the castle, his name became legend within Hogwarts. Students whispered about him in corridors, ghosts spoke of destiny, portraits debated in hushed tones. He was not yet present, but already his story was part of the castle's life. The years between Voldemort's fall and Harry's arrival were quieter for the wizarding world, though not without unease. The Ministry of Magic declared victory. Death Eaters were captured or went into hiding, and many believed the darkness was gone forever. But Dumbledore did not share this certainty. He knew Voldemort's magic was deep, his hunger for immortality too strong to be ended so easily. He continued to lead Hogwarts with vigilance, guiding students with both kindness and watchfulness, ensuring that the next generation would be strong enough to face whatever shadows might return. Life in the castle seemed unchanged. The Sorting Hat sang each autumn. Candles floated in the Great Hall. Quidditch filled the skies. Lessons carried on. Children laughed, argued, and grew, unaware of the war that had raged before their time. Professors, too, found a rhythm, though their eyes sometimes betrayed memories of loss. McGonagall was stern as ever, Flitwick cheerful, Sprout nurturing, Snape silent and severe. The castle's walls held secrets, but its rooms were filled with the ordinary sounds of childhood, of parchment rustling, of cauldrons bubbling, of owls flapping through windows. Hogwarts lived as it always had, even when the world outside trembled. When Harry Potter finally came to Hogwarts at the age of 11, the castle stirred, as if it had been waiting for him. He was sorted into Gryffindor, cheered by the table of scarlet and gold, welcomed by friends who would walk with him through joy and danger alike. His presence carried weight, though he himself did not yet understand it. Students whispered, Some with admiration, some with envy, some with curiosity. Professors watched closely, portraits leaned from their frames. Even the Sorting Hat considered him deeply, sensing both the courage of Gryffindor and the cunning of Slytherin, before placing him where he would find his truest home. From the very beginning, Harry's years at Hogwarts were different. The Chamber of Secrets stirred once more. The relics of the Founders returned to the story. The shadow of Voldemort crept back into the castle. Yet Harry also brought laughter, friendship, and loyalty. With Ron and Hermione beside him, with Hagrid's care, with Dumbledore's quiet guidance, he experienced Hogwarts not as a legend but as a home. He walked its staircases in awe. He ate in the Great Hall with wonder. He marveled at ghosts and portraits and enchanted ceilings, just as every child before him had. But around him the castle itself seemed to awaken, as if destiny had returned to its halls. Harry's first years were marked by trials unlike any other student faced. From the stone hidden in the dungeons, to the basilisk in the chamber, to the return of Voldemort in the graveyard, each year tested him and tested Hogwarts. The castle endured spells cast in fear, walls shaken by battles, secrets revealed from its depths. Yet through it all, it protected him as it had always protected those who needed it. The ghosts whispered comfort, the portraits guided him, the Sorting Hat offered counsel, the sword of Gryffindor revealed itself in his hand. Hogwarts itself seemed to fight beside him, its magic aligning with the boy who had become the heart of its story. To his peers, Harry was both ordinary and extraordinary. He struggled in lessons, excelled at Quidditch, argued with friends, and broke rules, just as countless students had before him. Yet he also faced dangers none had endured in centuries. Students told stories of his adventures, half in awe, half in disbelief. To the younger years, he became a figure of admiration, to some a rival, to others a friend. Hogwarts had always produced heroes, but never one whose story was so deeply tied to the fate of the wizarding world. For the professors, Harry's years were a time of vigilance. McGonagall watched him with stern pride, Snape with bitter suspicion, Sprout with warmth, Flitwick with encouragement. Dumbledore guided him quietly, offering pieces of wisdom, watching him with eyes that carried both sorrow and hope. The castle's guardians, both living and spectral, seemed to circle closer around him, as if knowing that the boy's presence would one day decide not only the fate of Hogwarts, but of all wizard kind. And so Hogwarts entered its final chapters in the great story of Voldemort. It was no longer only a school, it was a stage where history unfolded, where past and present collided, where relics and prophecies and destinies intertwined. The boy who lived had arrived, and with him came the certainty that the safety of the castle would once again be tested, that its walls would once again echo with war, that its legacy would once again be decided in fire and courage. The story of Hogwarts reached its fiercest trial in the spring of 1998, when the shadow of Voldemort returned, not in whispers or rumors, but in open war. For nearly 1,000 years the castle had stood, its walls unbroken, its magic unyielding, its traditions steady. It had survived plagues, persecutions, rivalries, and wars beyond its gates. But now the war was not beyond. It was within. The Battle of Hogwarts would test not only its stones but its spirit, not only its wards, but the courage of every student, teacher, and ghost who called it home. By then the world knew Voldemort had returned. His followers had grown in number. The Ministry of Magic had fallen under his control. Fear spread through Wizarding Britain like wildfire. Students arriving at Hogwarts no longer found the sanctuary it had once been. The Carrow siblings, cruel Death Eaters, stalked the corridors as professors, enforcing lessons of darkness, punishing resistance, twisting education into indoctrination. Even within the castle, children were beaten, forced to learn curses, taught to fear and obey. The warmth of Hogwarts dimmed, Its feasts grew hollow, its traditions poisoned. Yet beneath this surface, resistance lived. The students who had once whispered about Dumbledore's army now revived it in secret, in the Room of Requirement, a place that revealed itself only when needed. They gathered to plan, to practice, to keep hope alive. Neville Longbottom, once shy and uncertain, rose as a leader, his courage steady, his voice strong. Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood and others stood beside him, carrying the spirit of Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin alike. They carved messages of defiance, helped protect the younger students, reminded each other that Hogwarts was not yet lost. The castle itself seemed to aid them, the Room of Requirement shifting into dormitories, kitchens, and training grounds, sheltering those who resisted. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned to the castle in search of the relic hidden within, the final battle began. Alarms rang through the corridors, Death Eaters gathered at the gates, and the defenders prepared. Professors raised wards, students armed themselves with spells, and the enchanted suits of armor clanked to life at McGonagall's command, filling the halls with steel and echo. The ghosts drifted solemnly, warning and guiding. The portraits shouted messages from frame to frame. The very castle groaned as if bracing itself for the storm. The battle was fierce and terrible. Giants broke through the gates, their roars shaking the towers. Acromantulas swarmed from the forbidden forest, their legs striking the ground like thunder. Death Eaters dueled students in the courtyards, spells flashing red and green across the night. The Great Hall, once a place of feasts, became a field hospital, its long tables pushed aside to make room for the wounded. The walls that had echoed with laughter now shook with cries of battle, the enchanted ceiling above reflecting the storm of fire and fear outside. Yet, Hogwarts did not yield. Professors fought beside their students, house elves emerged from the kitchens armed with knives, centaurs charged from the forest with bows drawn, Istrals swept through the air carrying fighters on their backs. The defenders of the castle came from every corner, every tradition, every age. They fought not only for survival but for the home that had shaped them, for the castle that had given them belonging, for the values of courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition that still lived within its walls. The cost was great. Many fell in the battle, their names carved into the memory of Hogwarts forever. Fred Weasley, full of laughter, silenced. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, parents who had fought for a future their child would grow to see, struck down. Colin Creevey, too young, too brave, lost. Their absence left the castle heavy with grief. Even in victory, ghosts wept beside the living. Portraits bowed their painted heads. The Great Hall carried sorrow as well as triumph. At last, within those same walls, Voldemort himself entered, his voice echoing cold and terrible, demanding surrender. Yet the castle, wounded but unbroken, answered with defiance. Harry stood before him, no longer a boy, but the symbol of everything Hogwarts had given him. The duel that followed was not only between two wizards, but between two legacies, the legacy of love, loyalty, and unity against the legacy of fear, cruelty, and domination. When the final curse rebounded, when Voldemort fell, it was not only Harry who triumphed, it was Hogwarts. The Battle of Hogwarts was victory and loss entwined. The castle bore scars, its walls shattered in places, its towers broken, its grounds torn by giants' feet. Yet its heart remained. The Great Hall filled again with light, its ceiling showing the dawn, its tables once more lined with those who survived. Students and professors, ghosts and creatures, all gathered together in mourning and relief. Hogwarts had stood the test. It had been fortress, sanctuary, and battlefield, and in the end, it endured. From that day, the castle was remembered, not only as a school, but as a place of final resistance, a symbol of hope for all wizard kind. Its stones carried the memory of every spell cast, every life lost, every cry of courage. Children who would one day walk its halls again would be told not only of the founders and their relics, but of the night when Hogwarts itself fought, when its defenders stood together, when its heart beat stronger than fear. When the battle was over and the ashes settled, when dawn broke over the highlands and the smoke drifted away from the towers, Hogwarts stood once more. Its walls bore scars, its windows shattered, its grounds torn, yet the castle endured. For nearly 1,000 years, it had weathered storm and shadow, plague and war, division and loss. It had seen founders quarrel, students rise and fall, ghosts linger, portraits argue, legends fade and return. Through all of it, through every century, through every trial, the heart of Hogwarts had never been broken. The final victory against Voldemort was not only Harry's, not only the Order's, not only the Defenders, it was the victory of Hogwarts itself, of the spirit that had carried it across ages. The castle was repaired in time. Stones were lifted back into place, towers rebuilt, charms renewed. The Great Hall once again shone with floating candles. The ceiling mirrored the sky. The long tables filled with food and laughed students returned. Younger siblings of those who had fought, children of those who had survived, new generations who had only heard stories. For them, the scars were history, reminders of courage. For the professors, for the ghosts, for the portraits, they were memories that would never fade. Yet life moved forward, as it always had, as it always must. The legacy of Hogwarts is not in battles alone, nor in relics or secrets, but in the lives it has shaped. Every child who walked its staircases carried something of it into the world. Some became heroes, others healers, others parents, who told stories to their own children by firelight. Some faltered, some strayed into darkness, yet even they bore the mark of the castle in the spells they knew, in the rivalries they carried, in the values they remembered even when they denied them. Hogwarts has always been more than a building. It is a thread that binds wizard kind, a memory shared across centuries, a home that never truly leaves those who called it theirs. The founders' ideals, though blurred, still echo in every sorting. Gryffindor's courage shines in those who stand for what is right. Ravenclaw's wisdom guides those who seek to understand. Hufflepuff's loyalty warms those who serve and dreads. Slytherin's ambition drives those who strive for greatness. No child embodies only one. No life follows only one path. Yet the houses give shape to identity, reminding every student that they belong, that they are part of something greater. The castle itself remains alive. The ghosts still drift, the portraits still chatter, the staircases still shift, the suits of armor still creak. The Forbidden Forest still looms with shadow and wonder. Unicorns still roam, centaurs still watch the stars. The Black Lake still ripples with the giant squid. The merpeople still sing their haunting songs. The library still hums with enchantments. Its restricted section still whispers temptations. Its shelves still carry the weight of centuries. The Sorting Hat still sings each year, its brim opening to warn and to welcome, its voice carrying the memory of the four who built the school. Hogwarts breathes, as it always has, as it always will. And for those who pass through its gates, the memory of Hogwarts is eternal. To walk into the Great Hall for the first time, to see the candles floating and the ceiling showing the stars, to hear your name called and the Sorting Hat placed upon your head, to find yourself welcomed with cheers. These moments shape a life forever. Years later, when the student has left, when they have faced the world beyond, when they have loved and lost and grown, they will still carry that memory. Hogwarts is not simply a place of youth. It is a place of belonging, a reminder of who you are, a light you can always return to in thought, even when far away. The legacy of Hogwarts is not only in the great names carved into history. It is in every small friendship formed in a common room, every kindness offered to a frightened first year, every laugh shared in a corridor, every secret discovered in a hidden passage. It is in the ghosts who comfort the lonely, in the portraits who guide the lost, in the professors who push students beyond their limits. It is in the resilience of the house elves, in the wisdom of the centaurs, in the loyalty of the Thestrals. The castle's greatness lies not only in its relics or its wars, but in its life, in the countless moments of ordinary magic that together form something extraordinary. Through every age, Hogwarts has been a mirror of the wizarding world. When society was divided, so too were its houses. When dark wizards rose, their roots traced back to its classrooms. When heroes stood, their courage was forged within its walls. The school is both sanctuary and stage, both fortress and home. Its history is not free of sorrow, yet its endurance is proof that even in the darkest times, hope can live, love can guide, unity can triumph. And so the story of Hogwarts continues. Children still arrive each autumn, nervous and excited, clutching letters and trunks, boarding trains, sailing boats across the lake. They still gasp at the Great Hall, still whisper about ghosts, still laugh at Peeves's mischief, still feel the castle's magic wrap around them like a cloak. They become part of its story, and when they leave, they carry that story with them, adding to the legacy that stretches across centuries. Hogwarts endures because it is more than stone, more than spell, more than history. It is the living heart of the wizarding world, the place where courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition meet. It is the dream of 4 founders that has outlived them all, reshaped by generations, scarred and healed, wounded and victorious, yet always alive. Its candles still burn, its ceiling still shows the stars, its halls still echo with footsteps. The legacy of Hogwarts is the legacy of magic itself, enduring, mysterious, filled with light and shadow, always waiting for the next child to walk through its gates and find a home.